Right. Welcome, everyone, to Read Out. I am not alone, so joining me as per our usual arrangement, we do have John from Focus Trip, as well as Christian, and we have Shep from, you may remember from last week, who is a prominent member of our Discord, and also someone that Shep introduced me to, Mr. Professor McCoy, who is a professor of theology and philosophy, and has his own YouTube channel. I'll let him plug that in a second. But we got a full panel tonight, so I'm very excited to have you all and to have all of our viewers here as well. So we'll go ahead and do a quick round of intros, and as per usual, I like to say what I'm drinking, and today I'm smoking an excellent No Step on Snake cigar. It's a kind of a play on the Don't Tread on Me. They have a line of Don't Tread on Me cigars, which are like a Connecticut natural blend, and then their Maduro is No Step on Snake, and it is an excellent, very affordable cigar, so highly recommend it. And I am drinking a Balmore 15-year Scotch, which is actually my first time trying a Balmore, and I'm not sure how I feel about it yet, so full review pending. But it was one of the priciest Scotches I've bought, so that might be affecting my review. Shep, how are you tonight, sir?
Traffic. Traffic sucks. I hate it. Other than that, pretty good.
But you're here.
Yeah, I made it on time.
All right.
Who are you referencing? Who could have been late?
Richard made us.
Richard
late.
made me late. Yes, that's right.
John, sir, how are you?
I'm good. Happy to be here. Not drinking anything special other than whatever this blue goo is that my wife made me. So
she just
we'll know how the show goes.
All right. And Professor McCoy, how are you, sir?
I'm doing pretty well. First of all, I'm drinking a Loch Lomond, which is a Scotch cocktail. Mine's a Glenfiddich 12-year, which is one of my favorites.
Okay.
It's a great cocktail when I can find the parts for it, but it's really good. My the YouTube channel is just Professor McCoy. You should be able to find me there. I do all kinds of philosophy and theology discussions, videos. I put class lectures up there. I stream video games and talk about the philosophical content a couple of times a week. So check me out on there.
Absolutely. We'll be sure to post that link at some point before you leave. All right. Excellent. And Christian, how are you, sir?
Doing good, man. Thanks for asking.
Absolutely. All righty. I'm just pulling up that YouTube channel. Yes, I've got you. I'll go ahead and share that right now.
Oh, I'll grab the link if you want to just do your intro.
Okay, yeah, if you'll link it. Perfect. Excellent. All right, so today we've got a couple topics for you, including we are going to talk to Professor McCoy about the SSPX stuff because he is a Catholic, and I figured it would be good to have someone actually from that side present his thoughts on it. Because up to this point, we just sort of opined on it a little bit from an outside perspective. So we will have a short discussion on that. We also are going to get into the Jay Dyer, Tucker Carlson interview, which was an interesting watch. I did watch the whole thing. And we're going to specifically focus on the parts that touch on Calvin and Luther and Protestantism, as well as the parts that touch on philosophy more broadly. So there were two particular instances where Jay referenced philosophical ideas and was widely criticized for oversimplifying them. Whether or not the criticisms are fair is one of the things that we will get into. I think that it's sort of a mixed bag. So we will jump into all of that. And then we got a couple clips for you as well, some more topical things. But because we only have Professor McCoy for the first hour, and both of ththose first two topics are something that are in his purview, we're going to try to address those during this first hour. All right. For just some opening remarks, because today is a rather philosophy-heavy stream, I want to just encourage people when it comes to philosophy, because there's a simple fact that philosophy is often considered very inaccessible and rather, erudite, I suppose. The thing is, in one sense, philosophy is very hard to get into because there are so many people to read and be familiar with if you want to be really fluent in the conversation that is philosophy. And the canon of Western philosophy is a conversation that extends through more than 2,000 years. And so that can make it really challenging. But in the other sense, it's actually not that hard because everyone is talking about the exact same things. And so if you just know what people are talking about, then you can kind of jump in anywhere in the conversation and actually pick up what they're putting down, and you can understand, okay, what is this person talking about, and what are they focusing on? Which part of the conversation are they describing, and are they trying to kind of add their own position to? And so that's certainly been my experience. There are so many philosophers that I have not read, and yet I do have a good handle on the questions that are being asked, and so then when I do read a new philosopher, I'm able to consume it relatively easily, and I'm often surprised at how easily I can understand what they're talking about because I am familiar with the overall questions that are being asked. And so to that end, I wanted to provide you with a few resources that I would recommend if you wanted to just get started. So let me share my screen real quickly. Three in particular, and these are all linked in the description to this video. And here we go. But in order, the one I would probably recommend first. Oh, no, you're not seeing it yet. Let me actually share it. I'm not as skilled as John is at this. All right. And now you've got an infinite regress. All right, there you go. The first one I'd recommend is a bit of a surprise because Bertrand Russell is certainly not someone that you would, without qualifications, recommend on a Christian live stream. But I do find this particular work by Bertrand Russell to be extremely helpful. It is about a 4.5-hour audiobook. I mean, you can get the actual physical book as well. It is extremely small, very easy to read, and it just brilliantly lays out exactly that, the problems with philosophy, although I would prefer that it's called the problems of philosophy or the questions of philosophy. It's essentially the questions that philosophy seeks to answer. And it goes through in what I would call sort of a mental chronology of the issues. In other words, it brings up the questions as they would occur in time, chronologically ordered, but in your head. And so it's not a historical chronology of the philosophers, the different philosophers and what they've added to the conversation. It's more, if you were to start fresh and just start thinking about philosophy, what are the questions that you'd raise, and then how would you address those? And then it will bring up the different philosophers who have tried to answer those questions throughout time. And so the actual history is not in chronological order, but in terms of the way the ideas are presented, they are in sort of a mental chronological order, which I think is just one of the best ways to dive into it. And this is just being such a short work is very, very accessible. An alternative that is perhaps even more accessible would be Peter Kraft's series. It's a Word on Fire series. Word on Fire Institute is Cardinal Robert Barron's institution, and it's a 12-part series, and each one goes kind of pits two different philosophers against each other, or two different groups of philosophers against each other, and does a great job of just illustrating this conversation. Again, this is not going to be in chronological order, but it goes through topic by topic and describes, just gives you a good overview of the different questions that are being asked. And so another great introduction. Not quite as complete, in my opinion, as Bertrand Russell's work, but it is very accessible and very helpful. And each one is only about 20-something minutes long. So highly recommend that. And then finally, there is a whole free class from biblicaltraining.org. I've recommended this before, by Ronald Nash. And you can just go to biblicaltraining.org and you can find this. And it's 47 lessons. Total time is about 19 hours and 42 minutes. And it is just an excellent history of philosophy class. And so this one will go in chronological order through the different philosophers, but explaining their ideas and how the ideas have developed. And, not a complete course by any means, but it does a good job of summarizing the thoughts as well. So 3 different options that you can pick from. My preferred method, if you're interested in philosophy, would probably be the problems of philosophy, but any of those 3 will get you in the door. All right, let me remove that from the screen. Professor McCoy, do you have any additional thoughts on that? Any other recommendations that you would give?
Yeah, so funny enough, I just picked up and read this book, which is unfortunately mirrored because of my camera, but it's by Peter Kraft. It's Socrates Meets Jesus,
Mhm.
which was essentially when he was initially making up that course idea that you were talking about. He wound up writing this book, as well as a few others in a similar series, which is essentially it is a series of dialogues. It is this one at least is not exactly Socrates meeting Jesus, because as he says in the introduction, something like he doesn't have the pretension to write Jesus as a character, which I can respect that. So it's essentially Socrates meeting modern in the like capital M modernist sense theologians and sort of talking his way into Christianity, despite Christians and what they have to say about it. So it's a great look at the Socratic method. It's a great look at Socratic philosophy, the history of Christian thought, in a really accessible sort of way. So, like I said, it's a recent one. His Socrates sometimes sounds a bit like C.S. Lewis because it's Peter Kraft, but that might be a selling point. Another good book that is I was trying to find. I have it on my shelf here somewhere, but underneath something I think. Is called Believing Philosophy by Dolores Morris. I'll try and send you a link if you want to share it later. It's by a colleague of mine on USF, and she has this book is a great sort of introduction piece to how Christianity and philosophy sort of intersect, and it's kind of a an appeal to Christians to want to study philosophy and to think about these questions, and then how that looks from a biblical perspective. So both of those are great little introductions. I'll also just generally say, and this is going to be maybe controversial, as much as the great masters, the Plato's, Aristotle's, and even the great philosophers and theologians of Christian history, your Augustine's, Aquinas, etc. As great all of that is to read, it's not the best place to start. Certainly not without help and guidance.
Yeah.
So something like one of those courses or one of those sources will really help you to sort of get an idea of the environment of the terrain of philosophy, like you were saying at the beginning, and then that'll give you a springboard of to look more at the primary sources, at the ancient sources, the medieval sources, the early modern stuff.
Exactly.
But starting with an overview like that, excellent.
Well,
excellent.
and it gives credence to the idea. I mean, just this idea that they're all kind of talking about the same thing. There's a famous line, and I forget who first said it, but the idea is that all philosophy is but a footnote to Plato. And I have found that to be basically true, where everyone, Plato basically lays it all out, and then everyone else is just trying to answer the same questions with their own flair.
I like to caveat it at least. My spin on that is that maybe all of Western philosophy is not a series of footnotes to Plato, but it certainly all has Plato in its footnotes. So
Sure.
you need to at least have an idea of what Plato was talking about.
I think that's a more accurate way of saying it, just not quite as poetic. All right. Excellent. All right, we're getting nerded out here. This is quite the comment. I also saw some James Sucks comments in there, so I do appreciate that from all of you. All righty, jumping into the meat of today. Actually, let's see. Let's do a little bit of a reverse palate cleanser here before we jump into the meat. Let's see. I gotta share this again. I don't know if you guys saw this yet. Let's see. Here it is. All right. Shap, I believe this is your crew.
Oh,
I think. I don't know for sure. Is this I think this is Lutherans. Let's see. Who's this? Yeah.
which
Lutheran
guy?
pastor.
Cordova?
Oh,
You're talking about in
you
the
can't
chat?
see it yet. No, I'm sorry.
Okay, okay.
I always do this. I add it to the stage. There we go. All right, now you can see it.
Oh, hold on.
So yes, Jesus screws up bigger here than in any story I know. We'll let her speak for herself in a second here. The Lutheran pastor Andrea Rosk Metcalf during a chapel service. So here's what she has to say. This pastor. All right.
So she asks him to heal her daughter, and Jesus responds by calling her a bitch. This has been my
What?
favorite Bible story for a very long time. It used to be because it's such a blatant example of the humanity of Jesus. He screws up bigger here than in any story I know. She pursues him. She corners him. Her daughter is sick, possessed, unwell. This woman has heard what this man can do. She is desperate. She has nothing to lose. So she asks him to heal her daughter, and Jesus responds by calling her a bitch. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first." He is referring here to the children of Israel, to the Jews. So far, they have been the entire focus of his ministry, but then he continues, "For it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." There's not enough to go around, he could have said to her. Not enough healing, not enough blessing, not enough God for you or your daughter. That would have been hard to hear. But this. Jesus is tired. He is frustrated. Whatever is going on with him, he calls her people dogs. Some biblical scholars, they try to pull Jesus out of the hole that he has dug for himself here. He's calling them little puppies, they say. But he is not.
Ew.
It's a term of endearment, they say, but it is not. This Syrophoenician woman, this marginalized, outcast woman whose daughter is sick, she comes to Jesus for help, and he calls her a dog right to her face. She could have slapped him. We would have forgiven her for that, yes? We would have understood. She could have told him off, yelled and screamed in his face. We would have forgiven her for this too.
So yeah, not great, not great. So which version of Lutherans is that, John?
It's
Or Shep?
the everything Luther condemned adamantly.
That's right. The LCA.
ELCA.
ELCA. Yes. Yeah. There was another.
I need to like write some articles that I'll circulate in their circles about how like Luther wrote on the Jews and their lies and how they need to abandon the Lutheran title because it's like racist or whatever. I need to sign up these people into dropping the L.
Well, whatever works, they need to be silenced for sure. So I think, yeah.
John,
John,
so painful.
Christian, Professor McCoy, any thoughts on that blasphemy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that is maybe a difficult passage for some people to exegete if they've only ever thought of Jesus as their nice little friend that they keep in
Right.
their pocket and pull out on special occasions. You know, when you actually read the Gospels in their entirety, there are harsh condemnations that Christ put on certain people. He uses harsh language in certain times. He's very definitive. He's not just the little old nice guy that says generically, be nice, I guess, and that's like the only way that you live your life, right? So again, for her, maybe that is that's not her Jesus. Okay, that's not the Jesus that she grew up with, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Well, go ahead.
It emphasizes the distinction between Jew and Gentile, right? Which was really significant, right? And that was the first step of bringing in the Gentiles to the covenant or to the new covenant. And so without that distinction, there's no distinction to overcome. And so that's a large part of Christ's mission and instituting the new covenant. And notice that story ends, if I'm remembering the right one, with him healing her daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
Yeah, she continues to pester him, and then he says, because of your faith, your daughter's been made well. So
but he was
go
mean
your way.
about it. And that's worse.
Yeah.
Well, he says, I've come here for a specific purpose, and your time is not yet, essentially.
Yeah.
Right.
And my issue, I mean, her characterization, obviously, using a bitch word and stuff, it's obviously trying to be inflammatory. But I mean, she's not too far off in terms of Christ was using harsh language, and he essentially did call her a dog, and a female dog is a bitch. So, I take umbrage with her presentation, but that part is not so much the issue. But it's the part where she is condemning Christ for these words. If this lady, if Christ called this lady a bitch, she needed to be called a bitch. That was the perfect message that she needed to hear.
Well,
You
and
know.
he does call people specifically animals as well. He calls
Yeah,
them
brood
serpents.
of
He calls them
vipers.
whitewashed tombs. He calls people things, names. I mean, famously braided
Yeah.
a whip as well. So
I'm not
it's,
sure that
the whole premise.
the
is off.
dog thing that she presented is actually accurate. I think that the excuse me, sorry, I got something in my throat. I actually think that the polemic she anticipated is correct. It is like it is more of a friendly term for like a pet than a wild dog or any kind of pejorative.
I don't know. I don't even that it doesn't really soften it that much. But well, I don't.
Inspiring
I feel
Philosophy
like-
had a good video on it. It's like one of his shorts. You can
Okay,
find
all right.
it.
There might be an interpretation there. I've never
Yeah.
tried to soften it.
That's fair.
Maybe there is a case for that, but to me, it always seemed like it seemed like a harsh and rather hurtful. I mean, at the very least, he is othering her, right? To borrow the modern leftist term.
Othering a marginalized woman of color. How dare you?
Exactly. I did see another post that was it was too similar, so I couldn't include both. But it was another one along the same lines where it was, but this one specifically introduced the clip by saying, with James saying, we're commanded to show no partiality, and then immediately pivots to, but a lot of this he got from the Sermon on the Mount, and you know what? Jesus also showed partiality, and then goes on to give this story of how Jesus committed the sin of showing partiality. So clearly there are some issues. We will...
Sorry, how do you call yourself a Christian and get your Christology so wrong, though? Why even bother?
Do you want me to go on a rant?
Like, he might as well be your yogi or something. Like
Well-
a
Well, the
relatively
ELCA
nice guy who said,
baptize in the name of Mother Gaia. So,
wait, that Lutheran church does?
they're really weird. The ELCA, they're way more fractured than like any of the other synods.
Yeah.
But there are at least a couple parishes that do.
I
At
mean,
least
they
one
are as
parish that
little Christian, if not less Christian, than the Arians of the early centuries, right? And so that this is Redeem Zoomer's whole point, is that some of the liberals, Redeem Zoomer will agree that liberalism is not Christianity. It is a form of something else that is not Christianity, and yet you still have to fight back and take over their... I don't agree with his ultimate calculus there, but I think we can all agree that whatever they're saying is completely antithetical to Christianity, and their version of Jesus is absolutely not the real Jesus. I mean, you ask them, and they will tell you that they don't even really think that Jesus was... if they believe that Jesus existed, then they certainly don't believe in a physical resurrection, or that he actually did all these things. So it's not good. It's not good, Bob, as a VeggieTales character would say. All right. So we only have Professor McCoy for a few more minutes, so let's get on to the SSPX thing. I think I just want to open the floor to you, Professor McCoy. I do have a few questions, but I kind of just want to get your general sense. This is obviously a bit of a crisis, at least that's how I see it, so I'd be curious to hear if that's your perspective as well. Although I've heard a number of Catholics sort of express some thanks at the clarity that has come down in this instance, as opposed to prior instances where it just hasn't been as clear, or even just a month ago it wasn't as clear. Should you go to an SSPX mass or not? Was that a problem? And so certainly it is now more clear, which is perhaps a positive. But all in all, it does the whole crisis, as I still think it's correct to call, raises a lot of questions. Certainly for those within the SSPX, but even I think for the wider congregation of Catholics. So with that introduction, I'd like to hear your general thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, you say some Catholics see this as a kind of mercy to have have clarity to the situation. I see you've already heard my podcast episode on the subject. Speaking of which, my stupid little podcast, as it's titled, I just released an episode yesterday on the subject a little bit, although also kind of going wildly off the rails about ethics and and biblical history and libertarian legal theory, but that's for that. So go over there and check it out. As for the situation in particular, I think that it is a slow burning crisis. It is one more step in a controversy that has been sort of ongoing since Vatican I, not even since Vatican II, because you'll notice that this happened already. Right? Almost exactly the same thing happened with what are now called the Old Catholic Church after the First Vatican Council. And of course, the Second Vatican Council, the entire intention of the council was to sort of complete the work that was left unfinished in the First Vatican Council. That's why there were back-to-back councils in the same location. The church almost never does that. And so what we have again here is an order of otherwise faithful, primarily clerics, or at least starting with priests. Right? It is first and foremost a priestly society who express legitimate, or at least possibly legitimate, objections or questions or doubts about the conclusions of a council. But they wind up, in my view at least, and presumably in the magisterium's view, they wind up going about that critique in ultimately the wrong way, and not initially. Right? This isn't something like something where, Archbishop Lefebvre in 1970, which is when the SSPX was founded, very shortly after the Second Vatican Council concluded. He founded this society in 1970, and it wasn't until 1988 that he actually outrightly disobeyed the Pope, and the first excommunication happened.
He signed on to most of the articles of Vatican II, if not all of them, right?
Yeah. Well, it isn't even initially.
Who signed on to? Oh, excuse me. Sorry,
Lefebvre.
Who signed on?
The founder of the SSPX.
Who's that again?
It was Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, as well as some of his other priests and a couple of other bishops initially as well. Although I'm not sure exactly the sort of initial membership composition, but it's one of those things where it started out as just a question, a challenge, maybe, a request for clarity. And then when that didn't really happen, or didn't happen to their satisfaction, they just sort of started diverging further and further into disobedience and ultimately into schism. And now after that initial excommunication in 1988, throughout the 90s and early 2000s, they, like you kind of mentioned, the SSPX were sort of banking on the ambiguity of the official excommunication. Right? It wasn't clear that they were in fact excommunicated by Pope John Paul II's statement. It was more like, if you do such and such in such and such a way with such and such an intent, then you are excommunicated. But they would argue that, well, that wasn't our intent, and that's not exactly what we're doing, so I guess we're not, and so it's fine. And so they were sort of in limbo for another almost 20 years. Actually, a little over 20 years, if I'm remembering the dates right.
And then the excommunication was officially withdrawn. Is that correct?
Yeah. The excommunication was officially withdrawn in, I think I still have my notes over here. Wrong notes. 2009, I think. Yeah, 2009 by Pope Francis. Or sorry, no, Benedict XVI.
Yeah, I thought it was Benedict.
Yeah, he lifted the excommunication, and then Francis in, I think, 2017 restored formal and official faculty. So basically, they can confer sacraments licitly, or could for a few years. And the hope for both Benedict and Francis was that this was going to sort of bring them back in, reconcile the two, especially I would think Benedict's, because Pope Benedict also made the use of the extraordinary form of the traditional Latin Mass, whatever you want to call it, made that more licit and more widespread in the church around the same time. And so he was clearly moving in that direction of trying to sort of take in this this current of traditionalism and try and bring that into the church and to allow that to sort of have its place. And then, of course, well, there's a lot of criticisms to be had of Pope Francis, so fair enough. But I think he was still willing to sort of extend an olive branch even to the SSPX. And it's funny that the sort of extreme moderate Pope Leo, which is I think how a lot of people see him, I think probably correctly, is the one who just finally said, okay, no, you're not consecrating new bishops. And if you do, you'll be excommunicated. And then they did it. And he said, okay, well, you're excommunicated. Done. Right. Which I think, again, I think that straightforward clarity is extremely helpful, because now the choice is very apparent that
Right.
they're either Catholic or they're not.
Yeah, I mean, a clear choice can certainly be a way to bring about unity. I mean, there are a couple ways to bring about unity. If someone is arguing with you, you can either capitulate to their perspective, or you can make it extremely clear what the terms are, and then hope that they kind of come around to the ultimatum. And of course, this is the ultimate intention behind the whole concept of excommunication, is to be a ultimately unifying corrective measure. Now, what's your read on Leo? I know the terms liberal and conservative don't really map well onto Catholic leadership per se, in a political sense, but at least in sort of relative terms, Francis was seen as a more liberal leaning pope, and it does seem like Leo was going to be at least more moderate, perhaps more conservative. What is your read on his leanings?
Yeah, I kind of said, I think that Leo is more than anything moderate, right? Because he's certainly not continuing in the kind of extreme and sometimes dangerous ambiguities that Pope Francis was really often guilty of. And I think that really is the biggest problem that Francis had, that a lot of his statements were not sufficiently clear. Like, a lot of the things that he said, like, a lot of people don't realize this, but actually, this is funny. John Shepard, you were on a live stream with me a while ago when we watched something from the channel Wisecrack, where he was talking about how Pope Francis was like, he was the first progressive pope and he's all about the gays and stuff, right?
Right.
And then we just pointed out to him that, like, wait, hold on. He also said that homosexuality is intrinsically disordered, that language is in the catechism for a reason. There's nothing wrong with that. That sex and gender, while being linguistically distinct, can never vary independently. And all of these, like, super based statements of especially moral truth.
Right. When pressed for clarity, they'll
Yeah.
toe the correct line.
Yeah,
but
but
it is
then,
the
like I
lack
said,
of clarity,
otherwise,
the vague statements that are extremely susceptible to being misinterpreted by the press, especially when they're spoken in Italian. Or did he speak in Italian, or did he speak in his?
When Francis
Either way.
uses the F slur because it's Italian.
yeah, I think Italian is actually his first language, but he also spoke
Okay.
fluent Spanish too.
Gotcha. Well, either way, so
That's
there was
the
a
same
language
language,
barrier.
There's not really a difference.
Well, that's what's
I
so
did-
fascinating about having the first American pope, is that now he actually speaks in English. So there's no like, oh, we misunderstood. It's like, no, they're like, you actually have direct access to what he's saying if you're
and everybody
also
speaks
American.
English, right? So basically,
Exactly.
which, as much as this is going to upset the SSPX people, but I think that English today is probably the closest thing we have to Latin in the time of the Council of Trent.
The vulgar tongue.
Yeah. So I mean, let me just put it this way: I don't regularly attend a Latin Mass. I do on occasion. My parish has a diocesan Latin Mass that usually we go to if we sleep in, because it's at noon instead of 10 a.m. That's the biggest difference, really, as far as we're concerned. So I don't have a really strong dog in the liturgy war fight. I recognize and acknowledge the beauty and the history of the Latin Mass, but I also recognize and acknowledge the beauty and even the validity, unlike the SSPX, of the Novus Ordo, the ordinary form, the vernacular Mass, because when done well, it's when done properly, right, in accordance with the actual rubrics of the Second Vatican Council, there's nothing wrong with it.
Sure.
And so,
well,
yeah,
this
I'm
actually
moderate
came
on
up
that
in the Jay Dyer Tucker interview, that the Orthodox Church has kind of perpetually kept it in the language of the people, in the common
Mhm.
language, and so you'll have different liturgy. But it's always been translated. That was an interesting distinctive that I hadn't really thought about much. But
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
have a lot of.
I mean, don't
they would
tell
typically
that
be
to,
translated.
online convertodox orthobros who convert because the cool Eastern languages sound different and weird and go to the cool Eastern liturgies with the wacky foreignness. But I think no denomination should be judged by weird internet converts. So let's not.
Well, careful. We got some of those in the chat.
That's very fair. Well,
Look,
actually, I had a question
I
on.
don't mean to offend you in particular. I mean, just don't be like that. You know how to be.
We love
What?
everyone.
I had a question about the unity aspect of it, though, because does it seem weird, though, from my perspective, from a very outside perspective, looking at it? You have the SSPX get excommunicated, get reinstated, and then get re-excommunicated again. Isn't that strange? I suppose just going back over what a previous pope has done, or is that totally within their rights to go back and re-adjudicate that?
So there's a couple of aspects to it that I think that the defense of it would be to remember that excommunication is medicinal, right? The purpose is to bring them back into union with the church. It's not to kick you out, right? And so that obviously didn't work last time. So best case scenario, well, we gave it a chance the other way, and now we're giving it another chance this way and trying to correct the errors of the last attempt. Worst case scenario, we already tried this, it didn't work then, so maybe it won't work this time either. So it's hard to say. Unfortunately, if I have to make an ultimate prediction, I don't think that the SSPX as an order will return to the church, probably ever. I don't think it's going to happen. I think they're going to be another split off like the old Catholics, long term. But I think the hope we can have is that a lot of people see that that's what is going on, and that enough people will just, either
leave the SSPX and it kind of dies on its own.
SSPX, and then I don't see. That's the thing. I actually don't expect it to. I don't think it'll die on its own. I think it's got enough momentum that what we have here is essentially another
The newest
Protestant but not Protestant denomination.
Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead, John.
Structurally Protestant, but not theologically, something like that.
Right.
Well, so what I was going to say on that is I've heard other Catholics talk about the real clarification, because you talk about excommunication being a thing for clarification and a thing for unity, but the SSPX, it seems like if they could have gone to the root cause of the disagreements by simply clarifying Vatican II. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Timothy Gordon or what your thoughts are on Timothy Gordon, but his idea essentially was if you just say, hey, by the way, no Muslims and Jews is not a pathway to God, and that is not the intention of Vatican II, right? Which is kind of like one of the main breaking points between SSPX and the Vatican as it currently stands. If they had simply clarified that rather than clarifying via excommunication, like it seems like that would have healed the divide at its core, but maybe they're unwilling to make that clarification on Vatican II because that would kind of go against factions, maybe isn't the right word, but kind of the push of the liberal leaning clergy.
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that even divinely instituted institutions are still made up of individual people, and so that the motives are going to be mixed. So we can speak to, I think, Pope Leo's motivations, which I think are pretty clearly to get them to acknowledge what they're doing and to reunify with the church and then work on it from there. I really think that his goal is to try and work on the issues that they have, but work on it from a position of unity rather than antagonistic, starting from a point of antagonism, right? But I think you're probably right that there's enough I don't know, liberal members of the hierarchy, bishops and cardinals even, who maybe wouldn't go outright and say that that Islam is a way to salvation or something like that, or Judaism is another path to God or something like that, right? Or another active covenant, the sort of dual covenant thing. Maybe they wouldn't go so far as to say that out loud, but they want to keep that as a kind of public impression.
Right.
So
well, and
that-
that's kind
so
of
that,
like
you know.
people read into Vatican II that, and you can see how they take that away from the documents.
I mean, they
Right.
call it the
Mhm.
spirit of Vatican II, right? Isn't that
Yeah.
the thing is, even if you accept Vatican II in the text, the spirit is what needs to be repudiated. Do you
Yeah,
think
like
that'll happen?
Yeah, like we shouldn't have drum kits and guitars in mass.
mean,
One
sure,
time,
but
funny
that
enough,
seems
I
like-
dressed up as the spirit of Vatican II for Halloween one year to class. I had a
That's
sheet over my head with a line of music with claps on the upbeats, a picture of a rainbow mass and stuff like that.
Mm.
Which, yeah, it's
Well, maybe
Yeah,
maybe a
go ahead.
little another weird contradiction that's kind of in my mind with this is, correct me if I'm wrong, but Orthodox Christians widely are allowed to commune at a Catholic mass, but you've excommunicated the SSPX, who are way closer in terms of theology and Christology than Orthodox Christians are. Is that accurate? Because that again seems like a strange contradiction to me.
Orthodox are not. Sorry, Orthodox are not actually permitted to commune at a Catholic mass. It goes the other direction.
I've heard it the other way. I didn't think Catholics were allowed to take communion at an Orthodox church, but Orthodox were allowed to take communion at a Catholic church.
No, it's the other way around. The reason for that is that Orthodox are specifically and even individually schismatic, right? They reject the authority of the institutional structure of the church, and so they reject the statement of communion that goes along with receiving the Eucharist. That they are not united with the visible church as the under the Bishop of Rome, that sort of thing. However, because they have valid apostolic succession, their sacraments are strictly speaking valid, like it really is the body and blood of Christ.
So
And
you are
so-
talking from a Catholic perspective.
Yes.
Orthodox
Yes.
can't, but Catholics would allow Catholics would allow their Catholics to take Eucharist at an Orthodox church. But John, it sounds like you're saying that the
Yes.
Orthodox wouldn't let them, so it doesn't. It's kind of, or some
Sorry,
wouldn't.
that's
So
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
a moot
the
point.
way
I
I
also
heard
think that
it
is
was that way,
generally
but maybe
correct.
I got it backwards.
Okay.
Yeah, which again is it's a common misconception enough, especially from outside. You don't need to know this, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, but yeah, Catholics can, basically in emergency circumstances, you can receive the Eucharist at an Orthodox church if they're okay with it. That's the other thing too. Like a lot of the Orthodox churches are not okay with it. They just say,
Right.
well, no, Catholics can't intercommune. So no. But if they're okay with it, and some of them are, because the Orthodox are pretty splintered, I guess you'd say. Different ecclesiastical communities have different rules for these sorts of things. But it will fulfill the formal obligation that a Catholic has to go to mass and to take communion. It's just that you can only do that if it's your only real option.
Secretive line.
Yeah, I mean,
that's
could
not
do
taking
that,
the
although you
Eucharist in a
probably
good
go to
spirit.
confession.
That's
Yeah.
not a recipe for
The
success.
way to get
there.
past fencing
Yeah.
the table is just lie.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
probably go to
befo-
confession afterwards, because that might not be okay. I don't know if it's mortal, but it's probably sinful.
Can you
Yeah.
kind of clear something up for me as well,
Yeah.
Professor? So we see the excommunication of the SSPX mainly due for their consecration to new bishops, right?
Mhm.
And you also see the Byzantine or Eastern Catholics, they don't practice the Novus Ordo Mass, or they don't even recite the Filioque in their creed.
Right.
Yet they seem like they're untouched or almost forgotten. So what's kind of like the separating line between that?
Because it has mostly to do with the authority structure of the church.
Mhm.
The sui juris churches, especially the Eastern churches like the Byzantine Rite and the rest of those, they have their own historical lineage and authority structure
Mhm.
that exists in communion with the Bishop of Rome, but not part of the Latin rite of the Catholic Church. Whereas the SSPX are Latin rite. I mean, it's pretty obvious. It's the language they insist on. They are trying to be part of the Latin rite of the church while also rejecting the authority of that specific institutional structure. Right? So it's not just that. Now, here's an interesting thing. They have said, like, one of their excuses going into this was that, well, what we're going to do is consecrate bishops because this is an emergency circumstance, right? Which historically has happened. But that's basically where a bishop needs to consecrate successors, but can't, for whatever reason, get permission from Rome. Whether
It
that's
doesn't really
just being
apply
out of
when you've got an
contact
explicit
or persecution or whatever.
anti-permission. Yeah, whatever.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
that seems like
that's
a weird
radically
halfway
different.
house almost between, because it's like you're rejecting the filioque, which was one of the big things, but then still submitting to Rome, but not accepting the filioque. So it's like
Which is one of the main causes of
it
the
almost
Great
seems like a
Schism.
The difference
contradiction.
there
It's
too.
like, yeah, I'm Catholic, but we don't have a pope. It's like, well, not really then, right?
Well, they accept the same doctrines that the Latin Rite does regarding the procession of the Spirit from the Father and the Son. It is just not. They don't want to state it in that way, mostly for historical reasons. But it has been roughly clarified that it's the same doctrine that is believed on both sides. It's just that, as part of their sort of patrimony, they don't want to include that statement of the doctrine, and that's just sort of generally been accepted. It's weird. I think it's
partly
pretty weird.
in part for kind of what's the right term? Well, I know part of the initial controversy was, I mean, the doctrine was obviously controversial, but one of the elements was one of the elements of the controversy was the way it was gone about. Whether you agree with the doctrine or not, there was a question of, hey, can you just change the language of a creed that's been agreed upon without having another ecumenical council to specifically change the language? And that is what the East saw the West doing, is changing the language. And they would say, well, we always thought this, but now we're just, implementing the language to confirm it. But the East would say, regardless of whether it's correct or not, you can't do that. You have to call a council and agree on it. And so I think perhaps there is some just holding to that sort of technical element of it as well. Before we let you go, Professor McCoy, I just have one more question. I know we're running up on your hard stop here. Do you think so? In terms of like liberal Christianity, we see so many examples on the Protestant side, like the Lutheran that we played earlier, where I think it's very clear that this is simply not Christianity. Very often these sort of liberal tenets, and I use that term technically in a Christian sense. I'm not just talking about political left and right or liberalism, conservatism. I just mean like technical liberal Christianity. As I understand it, this is something that has become more and more popular in especially the South American Catholic churches, and it seems like, and certainly in the German diocese as well. First of all, is that correct? And does it go as far as we see it in some of these Protestant churches, where they are maybe if not officially, but teetering on the edge of basically denying the the physical resurrection and things like that, the types of things that you will see pretty explicitly taught in a lot of these liberal Protestant seminaries? Are things like that being taught in the Catholic seminaries?
Let me start this off by telling a story. I have a colleague who I will not name out of respect, but he is a defrocked Jesuit.
It's always the Jesuits.
Who teaches theology and teaches that hell is not real. So that does exist. I mean, there absolutely
but at least
is
he's been
that very same
defrocked.
problem. Well, true. Yes. I don't know if he's been excommunicated. I don't think so.
Okay.
He still considers himself a Catholic, and I think he's nominally at least is, to foreshadow your next discussion point. but he is just an example of the kind of thing that absolutely does happen in Catholic seminaries and Catholic educational institutions. That kind of liberalism has found its way in.
Will you see a sort of existentialism in terms of their philosophical leanings as well? Are they prone to sort of, I guess, almost sort of the nihilism that you see in people like Boltman or some of these, again, technically Protestant thinkers, but their ideas certainly seem to have really spread.
I think the root is more in. I think there's two different questions, right? There's the South American question, which is about liberation theology,
Right.
and that I think is more political.
Okay.
Right, that is more based upon sort of dialectical materialism and sort of communist influence and that sort of thing. And then there's the German question, which is, I think, really similar to the American question, just a little bit more metastasized.
Okay.
Right? And in those cases, I think that has more to do with what you're talking about. This
like, will they
this
read
undercurrent of
Schleiermacher?
existentialism
Will
and
they
nihilism.
read?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Actually, yeah, that's a good point. Schleiermacher is a good example of this.
I mean, which is, it's just not Christianity, and that's my question.
Yeah.
It's like I know what it looks like in Protestant circles, but I'm not as I don't really have insight into Catholic circles, and the Catholics do a better job of PR control because they have to at least keep up the facade of unity. And I know I'm
on the dark side, it's hidden better.
Yeah, exactly.
On the Catholic side, on the bright side, it seems like from everything I've ever heard, and from the colleagues that I know personally, the upcoming generations, like Gen X and younger, are not putting up with it. That there's a shift radically away from the sort of modernist, nihilistic liberalism that characterizes the people like the German bishops, people like, I'll name one name, somebody like Father James Martin, the Sparkle Masses and those sorts of things. The what is known in Catholic circles often as the Lavender Mafia. That is exclusively, almost exclusively, a boomer and older phenomenon. It's another one of those things that I think is largely generational, and I think it looks like it's starting to pass. Might pass like a kidney stone, but it's passing. So that's the bright side of the question, I think. It's there, but I don't know how long it's going to last.
Well, really appreciate you coming on. You are welcome to stick around or leave whenever. But it's been a pleasure to have you, and thanks for providing some of your insight.
I'll take that as my opportunity to get out of here. Like I said, I've got an out at 6 minutes ago, so.
All right.
Thanks for having me. If you want to have me again sometime, and we'll talk about nominalism another time, I'll watch the rest of the episode later and see what you have to say. See if it makes me angry. It could. You never know.
Oh, it might. It might.
All right.
All right. Sounds good.
Good to see you, brother.
Appreciate you.
All right.
Good night, sir.
Have a great night. Appreciate you, sir.
See you later.
All right.
All right. Let me drop his YouTube channel one last time in the chat for everyone. Thank you to Professor McCoy for coming on and getting berated by chat. Very meanly berated by chat.
Orthodox
Dude, I can't believe you pulled that up.
So bad.
I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to. I was trying to click your response to somebody ribbing you, and it moved right as I clicked.
Oh, I know. It's
That was
dangerous.
the worst time.
That was. I saw Christian start to laugh, and I was like, "What is he laughing at?" And I see the comment pulled up. I was like, "Oh no, Orthodox!" Or we were just talking about Orthodox being mean in chat.
Yeah.
He says that. That is funny.
All right. Well, we got a couple Ko-Fis, so I'll go ahead and read those now. It's a good transition here. Let's see. Oh, Jarrett sent. Wait a second. It says. This seems like one from last week. It says, God is good. I can't spell, unfortunately. I believe that was sent last time. So,
no, he said God is goof last time. So he's making up for it by saying God is good this time.
Did the bastard charge that one back too?
Yeah.
I forgot he did that.
That was so funny. Yeah, I still thought that maybe it came in at the very end of the last stream, and so now my notifications seem all out of order here. Let me see if I can find it. Nope, that's still old as well. Well, okay, I saw 2 notifications. John, do you have? Are you able to pull those? up?
I pinned the link. Let me click on it. I don't have access to the back end, but I can see if they're public.
Yeah, let me. Not sure. What
Coral Weezer 1 hour ago says Solomon 7:1 is a big toe money reference? Question mark. That is probably something about Solomon's lover's feet. If I had
Is
to
that
guess.
Song of Solomon or
Yes.
Wisdom of Solomon?
Well, how beautiful are
Probably
your
so.
sandaled feet, O daughter of Prince. The curve of your thighs are like jewels, the handiwork of a master. That's right. Feet, hot feet in the Bible, okay? It's canonical.
Okay, well, so are
You can't even
septum
argue with
piercings,
it.
though, so...
No, I am now finally. It did refresh. So the second from O. Jarrett that came in today is unable to watch tonight, but I'll catch it tomorrow. Christ is King and God is good. Well, we appreciate you with the support, and we appreciate you watching as well. We do love our video on demand viewers as well as our live ones. And again, so we are now streaming on the Redoubt X rather than on John's personal one. So if you prefer to watch this live on X, then go over and follow us on X at Regarding Doubt. And of course, we're always here on YouTube as well. All right. So next up, let's jump into. Let's do one more transition here. Again, for lack of a better phrase, a reverse palate cleanser here. This was...
Reverse palate cleanser? Was that just like drinking piss? Reverse palate cleanser?
All right,
Here.
let's see.
Eat a raw Brussels sprout. There you go.
Oh gosh, could you imagine?
No.
You're
I
just
only eat
begging
them-
for the next part of your meal as
God.
relief from whatever you put in your mouth. Gross.
Right. Or the mystery yucky jelly belly jelly beans.
Oh gosh.
I will not eat them. I don't care. You cannot make me.
All right, back to the beginning here. So this, you can read the lyrics here. It's as bad as it is. I'm just gonna let you
No,
just get
they're
it.
not singing it.
Yeah, you're right,
Well-
John. That kind of was like drinking piss, but instead for my
Yeah.
ears.
Putrid.
Yeah.
So, what's actually really unfortunate about this is there are way too many millennials in there. There are way too many people my age. Okay.
Mm.
And you notice how they're all unfortunately white? Like, they're really not helping themselves out at all. Not only are they a traitor to the gospel, but like, my gosh, please.
Making us look bad. Yeah.
God,
Oh, this is horrifying.
It's another
so bad.
Yeah, well,
ELCA
wow.
nonsense.
If you ever wonder why your country's being cursed and you look at, this is what you're producing in your churches, it's like, oh, well,
Let me just
There were
read
many-
that again in case you couldn't hear it. For gay, bi, and straight, a place at the table, invited to wed, to baptize, and preach a rainbow of race and gender and color for queer, trans, and ace, I think that's asexual, God's justice in reach. Good night. Well, yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about that, but that's pretty despicable. And,
It's everything Luther condemned adamantly.
of course, it's no holy, holy, holy. It's no a mighty fortress is our Lord. It's
Yeah,
it's
right.
almost as good.
it's
No, this is a
Just
Catholic
right there.
church. It looks like a
Stop
Catholic
that.
church.
Knock that off. I love in the divine service right before we go to Holy Communion, we sing the Sanctus, Holy, Holy, Holy. That's like one of my favorite bits of the service, because it's literally just ripped straight from Revelation, and
Right.
it's this cosmic scene of angels and all of the saints coming together to worship and adore Christ right at the altar where where Holy Communion is prepared, and it's just beautiful. And then you have whatever that was.
Was that a Catholic church
beautiful.
or was that a Lutheran church? What was
ELCA.
Yeah, that was
It was
Oh,
a
okay.
Lutheran church. It's ELCA. If you see that and it says Lutheran, it's ELCA. We're not in communion with them. We won't let them take communion at our church. I would never commune at an ELCA church. Yeah.
Not good. Not good.
No.
All right. So let me.
They
remove
schismed off of the LCMS and I think one other conservative. The ELCA didn't exist until the 80s. I think it got a bunch of the Seminex people. Seminexes, there was the professors in our seminaries were trying to liberalize in the 70s, and the students wouldn't have it. And there was like this huge walkout, and the LCMS managed to save itself from liberalization. And I think a lot of the people that left the LCMS during Seminex and a couple other is like this weird thing where a ton of like micro synods and the liberal members of the LCMS left and made the ELCA.
Yeah, I didn't realize that they were a break off
Yeah.
one.
So
what is the sort of the oldest, the mainline? What would Redeemed Zoomer consider the true Lutheran church?
in the US,
Yeah.
probably it's either the LCMS or something similar.
Okay.
Uh,
Interesting. I
I'll
just
have to-
assume the LCMS, because the LCMS is generally more conservative, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The worst you will find in an LCMS church is contemporary.
Okay.
That's it. And then it just looks like a conservative Baptist church.
Okay.
Not my
Do you-
favorite. Wish they wouldn't do it.
Do you guys have beautiful buildings?
Sometimes.
Cool.
Sometimes. The one.
Well, but in America, like not every denomination has beautiful buildings. Like there are some great cathedrals, but like you'll find Orthodox and Catholic
Oh, yeah.
churches that are like just holes in the wall. It's like
the two Orthodox
Yep,
services
available.
I've been to, one was literally in a converted house.
Yep.
And the other was in a strip mall.
yeah, one of them in Sioux Falls is a literal like shopping center area where they have like dentist office and whatnot. It's like in there in a building, and then another one has like an actual
That's a strip mall. John.
smaller church style building.
All righty. So did John, Christian, did either of you watch the Jay Dyer Tucker interview?
Yeah, I watched
Yeah.
most of it.
I
I
finished
didn't
it
get to
today.
watch. I didn't get to watch all of it. I just watched the one clip and then spent all my free time at work brushing up on nominalism and Luther.
Yeah, it's one
Trying
of
to
those
cram
things
that in.
where if Tucker has somebody on that's interesting, I'll give it a watch. But I don't make a habit of watching all of his shows, even though he is like the number 1 or 2 biggest podcast in the world right now, which is kind of crazy.
I thought Jay did pretty well. What'd you think?
I enjoyed it as far as the conversation go. It was actually less wild than I thought it was going to be, because I actually thought that Father Stephen DeYoung's stream with him was more interesting, for lack of a better word, because obviously I've watched like 100 hours of Jay, so all of the stuff that he had talked
Right.
about there,
You knew.
for the most part, I had already heard. So it was
What
kind
did,
of just getting
that
Tucker's
wasn't a dig at
reactions
your
on the-
church, MJ. By the way, it was a nice time.
What did Father Stephen DeYoung talk about? I have not seen that.
Well, so his was more on they focused on like the Book of Enoch. They focused on the Nephilim. They focused on like some of the like ancient lore, right, surrounding that type of stuff, and then also like his time as a priest, like having people confess to you for like 40 years and like some of the toll that takes on you. Like that's a really interesting conversation after hearing basically what does everybody struggle with. Surprise, surprise, it's basically all the same stuff over and over again, So I thought that was a really interesting conversation between the two of them.
Interesting. All right. So the part that I wanted to touch on is, we'll start here with when he gets into Calvinism. To start out with, I have a number of criticisms of the way that Jay presents some of these ideas, but I don't actually have an issue with sort of the method that he's using, which is telling a philosophical or theological story through time by pointing out a number of different figures and sort of building a case for how you think these ideas tie together. That's just typical pop level philosophical storytelling, and it is, especially when it's as condensed as Jay tries to do here, it's going to be very much subject to critique, and you are going to be able to poke holes in it. Sometimes it can be directionally correct, and that's kind of what we'll talk about. I think Jay makes a number of errors in terms of the story that he's telling, but in terms of just sort of that method of, this person kind of taught this, which then led to this idea, which then led to this idea, that's kind of what philosophy is all about. If you're someone who studied philosophy, you're allowed to do that. And it's, okay that it's not going to be fully fleshed out and entirely, one should expect some generalizations. So I'll try not to be overly critical of that. But the bigger question is he directly correct when he, in the way that he talks about Calvinism, or is he directly correct in the way that he talks about Luther or even Hegel? We'll get to as sort of an afterthought, but that was another philosophical thing that came up. And I'm more on Jay's side on the Hegel one. All right. So let's jump into this.
Strict soteriology.
I can't hear. Can you guys hear?
I can hear.
Yes, sir.
I don't know why I can't on my end.
Check your output on your computer and make sure it's matched with StreamYard's, because sometimes that's annoying when they're switched.
Okay.
And if you need, I can share it as well, or anyone else on the panel can if they have the ability.
Yeah, actually,
to.
if you don't mind, that would be great. If you share that at the same timestamp, that way I don't have to be tech support live on air here.
Just give me a timestamp and I'll get to it.
1423, the start of the What is Calvinism section.
And then I can share my screen, but you will need to actually put it up. Yeah. And timestamp is at 14:15?
Yeah, that's fine. 15's fine.
Okay. I'm ready to go in your.
All right, let me add that to the screen here. All right, there we go. Are you able to play it?
Oh, that's your screen, sir.
Oh, did I add the wrong one? Sorry.
Yeah.
There we go.
I was like, it's moving for me. I don't know what's going on for you guys.
Right. Try again.
Correct.
Take two.
Soteriology or salvation doctrines. It's also iconoclasm, which ends up, I think, affecting one's view of art and aesthetics.
Idol smashing.
Correct. And I was a very avid sort of iconoclastic Calvinist when I was young. It's also very rigid in terms of its view of social structure, church and state. The more I read the church fathers, the more I got into that kind of a theology, I realized that like Calvinistic sort of republicanism doesn't really match up with Byzantine imperialism or monarchy, the traditional views of the church's take on governance.
The Byzantine Empire is a theocracy.
Yeah. Well, yeah, pretty much. What's interesting is that there are spheres, right? So you have basically, if you think about the Byzantine double-headed eagle, that symbol is one body of the people, but church and state as two separate heads. So there's spheres of authority, but one body that they share, which is the people. So, and then the West, to a degree, had this until the Middle Ages, when you get sort of a rise of the 11th century papacy, which becomes also the state. So you get a papal states and a sort of under Pope Dictatus Papae is the famous document that says the church is also a state now. But until that time, the norm was church and state sort of working in unison. Symphonia is what it's called in the Greek. So that's what I had to grapple with. But Calvinism really doesn't see it that way. It's a lot.
So what do you think about that first part? Because obviously we see like the effects post-enlightenment, separation of church and state, and kind of the bifurcation there where it's like there's supposed to be a very defined wall. I mean, you'll have American Christians arguing that they want to keep religion out of politics. And in my mind now I'm like, I don't even think, one, I don't think that's really possible, because that just means that somebody else is just going to put their religion into your politics. But also I think that it should be a more holistic method, like the way he's describing it there, of basically you have different spheres of influence. There's a lot of overlap, but you can't separate your politics from your religion, and they have to be based on something. They have to have something as their moral framework. And like America has this generic Christianity, or generic God, for lack of a better term, as its foundation, as kind of like its moral code. But that has led to fracturing and kind of where we are now, where we're arguing, about very, very basic things like, do the unborn have a right to life? That's a controversial topic in American as a whole, our moral structure, right?
It's so the contrast that he's making here, because he does this a number of times. He'll talk about sort of, I don't know if it's in the clip that we'll play, but he talks about, when he was a Calvinist, he was much more libertarian, and Tucker says, "Oh, those often go together." And he says, "Yeah," and that
Which is
whole
a funny.
idea,
That's
it's
a
a very
funny
funny
contrast.
statement, because certainly there is a. Let me put it this way: American Calvinism, American Reformed thinking, specifically Presbyterianism, especially, has become much more okay with the idea of separation of church and state. But the original Presbyterian, and if you go back to the Dutch, who inherited a lot of these ideas as well. You have people like Kuyper, who was the head of state, and was very much interested in. He's a major theologian as well, and so there are, in terms of Calvinism specifically and what Calvin would have done. I mean, if you look at Calvin's Geneva, which isn't really even appropriate to call. It's not like he ruled Geneva, but he was like the main theological thinker in Geneva, and he was directly he advised the council that ran Geneva, and that was seen as kind of the proper way to do it. I mean, in as much as Geneva was sort of a model city, and it's not like Geneva everything went according to Calvin's way. He had somewhat famously some strife with Geneva, certainly early on. They kicked him out and then eventually invited him back. But Calvin would not have been a separation of church and state guy. There is a sense in which you can see some of the proto ideas that eventually became this sort of republicanism, but it's nothing like it is today. And like libertarianism would have been completely foreign, so it would be much more akin to like a form of Christian nationalism, if you were to actually look into what Calvin would have thought is ideal. It's a little bit more nuanced, but again, there are several times where Jay refers to like Calvinist republicanism, and it's like I'm not even sure what you mean by that statement. That is you're connecting two things that don't have a direct lineage. I'm not saying that you can't make the connection.
Well, so as someone who's never read Calvin's actual works, does he argue for a specific political structure in any of his works where Jay is getting this idea from?
I don't think the Institutes touch too much on. I've only read book 1 of the Institutes, and I don't know that would actually cover it anyway. But in what I've studied of Calvin, I'm sure he does write on church and state and the proper relationship. I know it certainly is exemplified, at least to some degree, in Geneva, and so you can certainly get an idea for what he would have liked there. I don't have a particular book in mind or text that I would go to, but that's mostly because I'm not a Calvin scholar, so I don't know for sure. But I would think that he has at least some writings, and at the very least, sort of the model of Geneva that you can look to, which again is going to be much more akin to a close tie of church working hand in hand with state, both having different jurisdictions, to the point where one of the few people that gets killed in the Reformation in terms of like a heretic getting burned happens in Geneva, and Calvin was in favor of his execution, wasn't necessarily in favor of the method in terms of burning, but he did advised them, but ultimately it was the leaders of the city that put the man to death. And so there was a clear jurisdictional difference, but they worked hand in hand. And so that, at the very least, I feel confident saying that is what Calvin would have envisioned.
Yeah, I mean, I was just Googling it here. You could see how there is like not Republican, sorry, libertarian underpinning with Calvin's railing against abusive taxation, which was probably an issue at that time in place. So maybe that was a hot button topic for them back in Geneva at that time. So, but yeah, I mean, that's something that's going to resonate with a lot of libertarians.
Sure.
That's right. Abusive taxations. They call it tyrannical exhortation.
There you go.
I feel pretty abused by my taxes. I'm pretty sure it's
no,
my
yeah,
largest monthly bill.
If only they could see how
It's
bad it
pretty
is
basic.
now. Should we keep going on this clip, or is there
Yeah,
more
go for it.
timestamps? Okay.
More like it favors republicanism. There were famous battles between, in England, for example, the Presbyterians and the monarchists. So they actually had a huge fight within the history of the English Reformation as to whether they would be Anglican sort of monarchists or whether they would be Presbyterian Republican Calvinists. So that was a famous Reformation battle.
But even that.
But long
for a
story short,
second,
again,
that's a little bit more contextual. It's hard to quite tie that to Calvin because that's going to be so contextualized by the Scottish-English relationship, right? So you've got the King of Scotland, James I, comes down to take over England, now basically uniting the kingdoms, and becomes James VI in Scotland, and then becomes James the First in England. And so now you have these two different countries with different church structures now united. And so, yes, there were fights between Presbyterians and Anglicans, but that's largely because you were trying to merge together two different ecclesiologies or two different methods of church governance. That's more of a political, contextual, historical idea, less of something that you could directly tie to Calvin, because the Anglicans were highly influenced by Calvin as well. At this point, they weren't always.
I'm also confused. If these are two monarchs fighting it out, though, one of them isn't arguing for a Republican style of government, or am I getting that confused?
No, it's one monarch. They were merged under one monarchy.
But before they were merged, they were fighting and then became merged under a monarch, right? So where does Republican democracy come into place?
They didn't get merged. That's the problem. That's why they were fighting. Okay. Right. So when Scotland still maintained its own Presbyterianism, and England had this Anglicanism, but you have one monarch. So you have one monarch, but two different churches within that one kind of unified culture. So that's where you get the strife.
Gotcha.
And Calvinism, I think, is just, it's antithetical to the first 1,000 years of Christianity, not so much because of those aesthetic or cultural issues. It's also Christologically errant in that the whole idea of what salvation is ultimately one's legal standing in terms of what's called justification by faith alone or penal substitutionary atonement. This idea that you're justified by God through a sort of notional acceptance of a set of ideas, and then God's attitude towards you changes. So it's dispositional, but it's not focused on an actual ontological change in the person. Orthodox theology is very different. Right, God's disposition is based.
So this, I felt like, was just rather slanderous. Yeah, God's disposition is based. This just feels like a complete straw man. I don't know how much Calvin J has read. I assume he's read some back in his day, but it's probably been a while. But Calvin, one of his largest contributions to the Protestant movement was bringing this emphasis of union with Christ back onto the table, and sort of correcting some of the, at least the rhetorical limitations of Luther, where Luther was, famously said, sin boldly, but God love more boldly still, that kind of thing, which of course, even that is not, shouldn't be taken as badly as one could take it. It's much more, he's more making a statement about following your conscience and sort of moral courage, and not being so overly concerned about, is this particular action might it possibly be wrong, but no, saying instead, like, I'm going to do what I think is correct, even if it could possibly be wrong, but I'm going to trust that God is going to carry me through, which I think is ultimately something that we all must do. And I think that's a really positive mentality and a huge element of what it means to be a man. But even still, there are plenty of things that Luther said that could be taken in a antinomianist view. That's a different word from nominalism, which we're going to talk about in a second. But antinomianism is anti-lawlessness, or it's lawlessness. It's basically rejecting the law entirely, rejecting the idea that we should try to be good, try to be holy, and instead we should just basically sin more so that grace may abound. I mean, that's the idea of antinomianism, is going directly against Paul and saying that no, we should just sin more so that God's grace will abound even more. And that is certainly not what Luther was trying to say. But Calvin, correcting some of that rhetoric, was trying to emphasize throughout his writings this idea of union with Christ, which is very, very similar to the Orthodox perspective of what it means, their theosis, essentially. It ends up sounding very, very similar. And this is where Calvin is such an odd figure, in that there's a lot of Orthodox theology that maps very well onto Calvin, and there's a lot of Catholic theology that maps very well onto Calvin because of the more Augustinian predestination side, and that side is completely rejected by Orthodoxy, and then the emphasis that the Orthodox have, it often maps very well onto his views. And so he's a very interesting figure, but he's so commonly just parodied. People that are not Calvinists, and even people that are Calvinists, very often do not have an accurate sense of Calvin's teachings and Calvin's emphases, and to the extent where, like, predestination is not something that Calvin would have emphasized as an apologetic. I made this point in the Discord. Someone like R.C. Sproul was very famous for his staunch defense of Calvinism, and he had a solid doctrine and message, but so often the clips that you will see of R.C. Sproul are on predestination, his defense of predestination, to the point where it seemed like that was a major part of his apologetic. And perhaps that's just because that's where he was being attacked. But it does create problems, because predestination, this doctrine is not certainly Calvin and Luther all would have agreed that this is not something that you start with. It is simply a necessary conclusion from an understanding of God's sovereignty that we hold to, but it's not something that you include in your early apologetics, or you say, oh man, you're predestined, therefore accept Christ. It doesn't really make much sense to go about preaching in that way. And so Calvin gets unfairly maligned a lot. And I think Jay is falling right into this pattern. I don't think that this is fair at all. And I think the very thing that he's contrasting with what Calvin, with Calvinism, is something that Calvin would have wholeheartedly affirmed.
Not on purely a legal stance, but on your actual ontological change. So a metaphysical change in you versus a dispositional attitude. So maybe we don't get too heavy into philosophy, but
I do want to. What's the difference between the two?
Basically, there's an idea in the Middle Ages called nominalism. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Okay, so nominalism is the idea that there are only names to things, not essences. So there's no human nature, there's no dog nature. When we talk about natures or classes or sets of things, we're not giving an ontological or metaphysical status. We're just simply classing things together linguistically in a set. The Middle Ages in the ancient world, the time of Paul or the church fathers, they thought very differently. They thought that things have natures, they have essences. And so the words aren't just terms or nominal nameism. They actually describe what's really there in them metaphysically. Okay. So there is human nature. And in Orthodox theology, Christ.
We'll actually let it go a little bit farther. I want to hear the Orthodox side.
Assumes.
Who would deny that?
In the Middle Ages, it begins with people like William of Ockham. So Ockham is the first nominalist. And
the man with the razor.
Exactly. He's known for that. And he challenges some kind of established ideas of like essential. It's called essentialism, that things have
Yes.
essences. And so he also goes up against this idea of universals, that there's no such thing as a universal class or essence of a thing. And that had been kind of the norm since.
All right, so this is really tricky. This is deep water, and Calvin is Jay is speaking with very broad brushstrokes. So it's, I don't want to fault him for that necessarily. And there is some truth that Luther was influenced by some nominalist thinking. Whether or not Luther was a nominalist is a question of debate, although I think that
No.
I tend to agree with you, Shep. I think that the consensus among people that actually understand Luther and aren't coming at it from the outside would say no. I mean, he absolutely wasn't. To the extent that he was, he did pull some elements, but essentially Luther is working with a whole new paradigm. He is largely rejecting scholasticism in general. Now, nominalism was a reaction to some elements of scholasticism. It's developed within the scholastic system by people like William of Ockham. And it would have been an element of scholastic teaching that Luther would have been trained in. But even nominalism, this is part of the big issue. Nominalism gets so unfairly characterized, again, just like Calvin does, to where even those elements that Luther did adopt from nominalism, in my mind, that's not actually a bad thing at all. And this is where the idea that nominalism just completely rejects universals, the existence of universals, is, I think, an unfair characterization. There may be some nominalists who go that far, but that doesn't seem to be true of Occam. And one of the big things about Occam that makes him confusing and hard to study is that Occam, he proposed a lot of challenges and tore down rhetorically a lot of issues that he was seeing within scholasticism in terms of how they were using the Aristotelian categories and basically assuming an essentialist like a reality of these categories, a very like finite or a concreteness to these categories that Occam felt was unjustified, and he attacked elements of scholasticism, and then he kind of went off to talk about politics and never really built up his own system. He kind of painted himself into a corner, and then never actually went on to develop sort of a positive view of what he felt like scholasticism should be and what views they should take. And so we can say what he was against, but it's much harder to say what Occam was for. So that's one of the challenges, and that's one of the reasons why he gets so unfairly criticized, is because, or at least you should know that when people do criticize him, they're very often just sort of speculating or assuming what he would have thought. Let me share a picture. I'm going to add this to the stage here. I might have to remove you first. All right. So there we go. So this is actually, I have this as the background as well. This is a very famous painting by Raphael, and it displays Plato on the left here and Aristotle on the right, in the center. And what you'll notice is one of the key elements of this picture is the direction of the hands, where Plato is pointing to the sky and Aristotle is pointing out. Before I go on, let me just post this in the chat. This is Ryan Reeves, a link to Ryan Reeves' video on Occam, and it's only like a 30-minute video. Very helpful. Just gives you a little bit better sense, a little bit more sympathetic explanation of what Occam was trying to do. It's not very dense. But so looking at this picture, what Raphael was trying to communicate is a key difference between Plato and Aristotle's perspectives. And what's so interesting is, so nominalism, that term, doesn't really come about until Occam and that time period. But a lot of what Occam was saying actually does map onto this Plato-Aristotelian distinction that they have. It certainly is not fair to call Aristotle a nominalist, but he is not nearly as much of a what they would call like a realist as Plato. He's often considered like a moderate realist. And it all comes down to their understanding of the forms and how real the forms were. So form is just an old philosophical term for idea. And essentially, Plato is saying the reality is found up there. Reality is found in the world of the forms, where there is like a world, a separate world where there's a perfect chair, and any chair that you experience participates in the chairness of this perfect chair, and that's why we can recognize it as a chair. Whereas Aristotle would have been much slower to adopt that type of thinking. He did accept that that universals were real, but he felt like the reality of the universals was found out there. It was found out in the world, and through sort of this concept of relationality, you could connect two different chairs to each other, but because each one sort of contained an element of this chairness, but not he wasn't so quick to sort of abstract to like this world of the forms, and nominalism is much more akin to that idea of reality is out there. It's more in the actual things that you encounter. One way that it often gets characterized, and I think this is a rather bad characterization, but I'll just provide it so that you understand how people often think about it, is that realism is all about reality in the universals, like universals are real, and nominalism just says, no, there aren't any universals, there are only individuals. And that's a false characterization, I believe, of most nominalists. But
that might be a mischaracterization. Isn't that just the technical correct framing of that, though? That a true nominalist does not believe in universals?
Well, no, I don't think so. I mean, if you wanted to define that term that way, I suppose you could. But if you look at actual people that have held to nominalism, there are nominalists who do deny universals, but do hold to sort of another concept they would call abstractions. And then there are other nominalists who would hold that there are no universals, but there are, there are, they wouldn't talk about abstractions, but they would talk about something else, but they would hold to the idea of universals. So it certainly isn't, that term can't be taken as a monolith simplified to that phrase of not believing in universals. But certainly applied to Occam, I think that's a little unfair. The challenge, the way I think that it is helpful to look at this is, well, this is another example of what complicates this issue so much. Take someone like Cardinal Henry Newman, who was at one point an Anglican, then converted to Catholicism, and he wrote a book called Grammar of Assent, and it's essentially proposing a new grammar, a new way of talking about philosophy. And he tries to basically flip the paradigm or change the paradigm from this. And he gets accused of being both a realist and a nominalist, and there is no firm consensus on which one he is. And so I think this is something that maps rather well onto Luther as well, where when he's trying to speak with a whole new paradigm, it doesn't map perfectly onto these scholastic, schemas that they had in terms of how they thought about these things. They couldn't quite place him. So it might sound, he might say something that they would say, oh, that's nominalist. But really they are hearing the same word and assuming nominalism when Luther is trying to speak with a new grammar. Now, the problem is Luther was not particularly systematic in his grammar, and so that also complicates things. But Newman is very systematic. And what Newman does that I think is rather brilliant is he changes the paradigm to now it's not that reality is up there or out there. Reality is, in Newman's view, experienced. What is most real are the things that we experience. And those could be universals, right? You experience universals like love. Really, every verb, every noun is a universal. So to deny the existence of universals, it creates a lot of problems just for grammar and talking. And so you do experience universals when you also experience individuals. And very often you'll experience individual, the most concrete experiences are the individual experiences of these universals. But Newman, the most real for Newman is the experience, the concrete, whereas the things that we think about in our head, those are what he would call notions. And so rather than kind of saying, like Plato, reality is up there, or Aristotle, reality is out there, Newman would say that reality is what we experience, and and then as we think about those experiences, those thoughts are notions. They become more abstract and less real. And so when we experience love, that's real. But then when we think about love or think about our experience of love, that becomes less real. That's more notional. It's more abstract. But it's not perfectly mapped onto this idea of universal versus individual, right? Now we're talking about real versus notional. It does not map perfectly onto universal versus individual. It still, in fact, includes the concept of universal and individual, but it now introduces this new concept of real versus notional. And the confusing thing is Newman's idea of real is different from both Plato and Aristotle's word real, what they would have meant by that word, what the concept they were trying to communicate. So it gets very complicated trying to understand what all these people are saying when they're using the same word to mean different things. But I think Newman is much more on the right track. And again, I'm painting with very broad brushstrokes here, so it's not I'm definitely oversimplifying Newman. But the very fact that people can't quite figure out which one Newman was he a nominalist or a realist, just shows how complicated this question can be. And so, no, John, to your question, I think that the idea that Occam would have denied the existence of universals is certainly unfair. And I think to say that broadly, anyone who is a nominalist necessarily denies universals is also unfair. There might be strains within nominalism that go that far. But even then, it's not usually to the extent that sort of the outside critiques assume. Even if they sort of deny some version of universals, they have other stand-ins that accomplish very much the same thing. So hopefully that doesn't just muddy the waters completely. But I think that is the complex conversation that Jay is trying to speak into. And to simply say that Luther was a nominalist is, one, probably not true. And even if he was, that's not really what Jay is saying that it means, or at least to the extent that Luther was a nominalist. Luther did not deny universals. Luther is pretty clear that he did not deny universals. So if that is what Jay is, if that's how Jay is using the term, then that is absolutely not something that you could apply to Luther. So, because Luther is pretty clear in his writings that he affirms something closer to like a Platonic view of the forms, often over and against the more scholastic Aristotelian perspective. Because Thomas Aquinas largely adopted Aristotle's view of realism and essentialism, and Augustine, who was the order that Luther was in, he was an Augustinian monk. Augustine was much more a Platonist. In a sense. I mean, he very much tried to incorporate Platonic philosophy into his theology. So kind of wrong on all counts in my mind, for lack of a better way of putting it. All right, keep playing. Any I mean, if you have,
I just wanted to say I pulled this up. Jay isn't critiquing nominalism. His thesis is that the Lutheran Reformation is born from modern thought, and the problem with that is that its basis is in modernity, not the Trinity. I highly encourage you, before you go and say that, go read the Augsburg Confession and the Apology of the Augsburg Confession. If you like, one of the things that people kind of misunderstand about the Reformation in Augsburg is that it's not this new idea. We literally get every one of our ideas from the Church Fathers and the Holy Scriptures. All of it.
The other thing that I'll say is that a lot of this distinction between universals and individuals and which one is more real actually collapses when you introduce the idea of the mind of God. Especially when you could have introduced this idea of more experientialism in Cardinal Newman, because now you have God, as God experiences these concepts, these ideas, they become real to God and therefore real to us in a way that they would not necessarily otherwise be. And so, you could ask, would there be still the form of a chair if there were no chairs in existence? If there was never a chair, would chairs still be real? And I think a Platonist would kind of have to say yes. The Aristotelian would say no, probably not. But maybe. I think they'd be more complicated. And then the nominalist would say no. But when you introduce the mind of God as sort of being, a stand-in sort of for the world of the forms, then now the answer still might be no, unless God has this concept in his head, in which case the answer is yes. And so it kind of just depends, but it's all pure speculation. Whether or not the form could be real without any instances, any individuals' instances of the thing. All right, I'll stop talking. We should keep playing.
Plato and Aristotle as well. But so you get a denial of essentialism and essences, and then you get another guy named Gabriel Biel, and he's very influential on Martin Luther. And so when the Reformation kicks off, there's this debate about how could you be called righteous if you're not in fact righteous. So if as a human being you are, menstrual rags, as Isaiah says, as the reformers said, then how could God call you righteous without being a liar? Well, enter in nominalism, and nominalism is able to say, because things don't actually have essences, they just have names. And so if God calls you that, you are that legally, even though in actual fact you're wicked. So that was, and Luther was very happy to utilize that nominalistic approach. And by the way, this is not just my theory. There's famous Lutheran scholars. There's a book called Harvest of Medieval Theology by Heiko Obermann. And the whole thesis of that book by a Lutheran is that, Luther had to use nominalism. So we're also, though, moving away, not just from theological squabbles, but the idea that things have natures. And this is how we get to David Hume and Kant and these Enlightenment figures, which give us the
So this is getting into forensic justification. I think that concept is a little bit more fairly attributed to Luther, certainly, than to Calvin, in terms of sort of the nominalist influences there. But even with Luther, it's not. There is an ontological change. It's not this idea that God can just call you whatever he wants, and because he called you that, even if you aren't that, then you are to God. That is a mischaracterization of Luther even. There is an ontological change. Perhaps Luther would have said that, because God has called you righteous, then you are ontologically righteous. And of course, with Luther, it's, the righteousness is, Luther will use the term an alien righteousness, and so the righteousness is the righteousness of Christ. That is how we are made righteous. And then again, Calvin brings in that idea more concretely of our union with Christ, and so we are being made righteous through that union. But that's a much more fleshed out idea of what's going on with Luther, and then again sort of aided by Calvin and more fleshed out later. But it's not. It's certainly a mischaracterization to say that Luther was applying nominalism and to say that the sinner was declared or named righteous even though he wasn't. That's not. That is a gross oversimplification.
My biggest contention with this clip is just that he's trying to pin modernity, a lot of the problems of modernity, like transgenderism, on the Reformation. Like the Reformation, well, I shouldn't say the Reformation, on the Reformations. It's like, well, these guys did a nominalism, and now we've got the transgenders.
Well, but you can see how his argument logically leads from one point to the next, right?
You can, but it's not accurate because we aren't Lutherans aren't nominalists. I know Luther had some weirdness about nominalism, and he was kind of in and out and wishy-washy on his philosophy because he's not a good philosopher. But our scholars, our scholastics, they were not. They were realists, most of them. And you can't actually, hold on. This is something I was talking to Pastor Whedon about this today. I can actually just read it because he sent it to me. He says, cool. If the accusation is that Luther's nominalism is the fault of the trans movement, I think he got that backwards, you might find it interesting that Luther wrote in the Smalcald articles, I don't know how to read that. It's a bunch of titles and numbers. Roman numeral 3, Roman numeral 11:2. As little as the power has been given to us, or to them, the papists, to make a woman out of a man or a man out of woman, or to abolish distinctions of sex altogether, so little have they had the power to separate such creatures of God or forbid them to live together honestly in marriage. Basically, talking about you can't, the papists can't alter reality just because they want to.
Right.
My
So my
thing-
argument would be simply that, well, you can argue that Luther said silly things, which is always fun because Luther says lots of wacky, silly things.
Oh,
all
he
the
says a
time.
lot of silly things.
So that's why it's hard to take, like, obviously you take him seriously, but at the same time, anything that he says that's weird, you can just say, oh, well, that was just him being satirical or him being off the cuff or him being strange. But my point being that even this guy in the comments who was saying that the reformers would have, like burnt at the stake the Lutheran church that we saw earlier, right? You can see how one thing logically leads to another by the breakdown of an authority structure, right? So from like a Western perspective, it's like, yeah, the Catholic Church was corrupt, yada, yada, yada. So now we've got to split off. And it's like, okay, well, they split off and then they split off from the Zwinglians. And then it's now what we have now. And it's just kind of like this nightmare where you can do basically whatever you want and still call yourself like this Christian, right? To the point where calling yourself a Christian doesn't really mean anything, right? So we can see how even like the reduction of the authority structure and the just not even reduction, I would say destruction of the authority structure in the Western Church, to where like I don't know if any Protestant sect can really call anyone else a heretic. Like I don't even know if they have that power or ability to do so.
They can
Or,
call
like,
it, but they can't enforce it.
Well, right, exactly. So it's like, whereas that seems to me like that power has been lost, where the early church and the apostles taught to kick people out of the church and to enforce these things. Right now, you could say, well, they had a special charism, so it was only they that could do that, and then that was lost immediately after.
When
the
talking
apostles.
about like the destruction
Also
of
seems strange.
the authority, like I'm a little confused by that because like the Lutheran Church, we still have like a church structure. We still kick people out. We still do all that.
Which Lutheran church?
The Lutheran Church, the Confessional Lutheran Church, the one that believes in the confessions.
LCMS, ECLA, like
Well,
which
not
one?
ESDI.
Can you anathematize or excommunicate all the other Lutherans and say like, hey, you're not part of us and you don't have communion with us?
This is a little pot calling the kettle black because you're Orthodox. Well, you're moving.
I'm not Orthodox. No, I can't call myself an Orthodox. At most, I could call myself an Inquirer, but it's regardless.
It's the same. It's the same authority problem that you have, though, because like the Orthodox are all divided. You've got the more liberals and the fundamentalists. Like what's his name? Trenum.
Father Josiah Trenum.
Yeah. You've got all these guys that are calling each other.
I think you might be confused because within the Orthodox structure, any bishop can excommunicate any other bishop. They're all equals in that regard. So when they have active communion with each other, they are actually in communion, right? If the Greeks, for instance, which might be a problem in the Orthodox Church, if they were to reunite with Rome, the rest of the Eastern Orthodox churches would excommunicate the Patriarch of what's his name? Bartholomew.
Yeah, it's Bartholomew, I thought.
Yeah.
I figured it'd be
So
Bartholomew.
if they do excommunicate them, then
it would be just like Rome schisming in the 11th century, right? It wouldn't.
Right, but
it wouldn't be different.
To some degree, it's also, the only difference between that and if one Lutheran church excommunicated another branch would just be the number of people. But ultimately, that the group that gets excommunicated, they could claim that they were the true church. There's no enforcement mechanism beyond the excommunication from whatever your institution. So the only difference is the size of the institution.
I don't think so, because they're making a different claim, right? So Lutherans don't really claim to be part of the one true church, right? That there is
Sure
only
we do.
one visible institution,
Yeah, we
whereas
are.
Orthodox are making that claim that they are the only visible
Well,
institution of believers.
Visible or invisible? It's a different.
I
those are
said
different
visible.
things.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure.
Because like
I don't
Lutherans
want
are
to
like
mishear you.
technically in communion with Baptists, even though their sacramentology is completely different.
No.
Yeah, that's true. But when
Well, we
when
shouldn't be.
you are
Some
excommunicated,
pastors get weird, but no.
but excommunication in the Protestant schema is saying that as far as we understand, you are outside of the church. And of course, when we say church, we are referring to the visible church. But that's
So if you have people singing like the bisexual orgy song during mass, like it seems like that should just be, yeah, you're outside of the church, dog. Sorry, not sorry.
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, obviously.
Well, right, but would like part of the LCMS, would they just formally say that this branch, as long as they're practicing this and the people that go to this church, they're excommunicated and outside the visible bounds of the church?
Yeah.
I'm sure there are
Well,
plenty that would want to do that.
could they,
whether
or have
can-
they?
We probably haven't explicitly, just because I don't think we need that. We can just say, here's what the Bible teaches. They're not doing any of that. They're
Well,
not
but
us.
even that, do you have authority over what the Bible teaches, right? Because they would just throw that same back at you. That well, this is what the Bible teaches when you interpret it.
Right, but
with
that
a
would be the
modern
exact
word.
same as if a group of Orthodox churches or bishops excommunicated another bishop, they could.
Well,
fight
no,
back
but
and forth in
the
same
difference
way.
is that the Orthodox would say that no, only we have the authority to interpret the Bible.
But so would the group that gets kicked out.
That would be a strange claim for them to make. I would be shocked if they did say only I can interpret the Bible.
That's what most sects do.
Well, I think most reformers say that you have almost a duty to have personal interpretation of the scriptures, whereas that's just not a thing in the Eastern Church. Or a right to personal interpretation.
Yeah, I mean,
No. Depends on what you mean by personal interpretation. Like, we believe that you are able to understand the Bible. Like that is a thing that human beings.
but that
can
doesn't
do.
mean that every personal interpretation is correct.
Yeah.
You have a duty to study, and you do have so there, and there are some we will allow for more differences than are necessarily allowed within the Orthodox or I would say the Catholics, but the Catholics.
Well, right, but that's
seem to
where
allow a lot of
that
stuff.
goes back to my point, though. If you can see how, because of your allowance of a wider range of views, that now changes
right,
things like
so-
sacramentology, soteriology, and you can see how that leads into these fringe groups
To
that
go
are
back to
like,
that I get. So if Jay made that case that this is the case how Protestants are responsible for the trans movement, and it was because Protestants upended the authority structures in the West, and that ultimately led to the Enlightenment, which ultimately led to these postmodern philosophers that ultimately created this movement of transgenderism. That I would think is a totally fair critique, and I basically would sign on to that. I mean, I don't know that it's fair to blame the reformers for that. I think it'd be much more fair to blame the Catholics for that, really, in terms of kicking out the reformers. But
the Orthodox would disagree with you. Yes, it is all the Catholics' fault.
yeah, right.
Well,
but
a lot of the
that is an
worst
argument that I
ideas-
think is totally fair. But that's not what Jay says. Jay is trying to make a nominalism argument, but I think that you're correct. It's the authority that ultimately the breakdown of authority structures in the Western Church that ultimately led to the Enlightenment and the postmodernists and ultimately transgenderism. That is a lineage that I could sign on to. But that's not the argument Jay is making.
Just back to nominalism for a second. Luther is weird on nominalism, right? He had nominalist teachers. He has a kind of nominalist background, even if he doesn't fully sign into like the most extreme version of nominalism. You kind of see like there might be people who interpret some of his writings or some of his philosophy, correctly or incorrectly, as a nominalistic sense of things, right? So you can see that how people following Luther, some might be more nominalistic, some might be less nominalistic, right? So now you're getting this other divergence of views underneath Luther.
Yeah, but I don't think that any of Luther's views would lead directly to transgenderism.
Again,
I think it's just a mischaracterization of nominalism.
not directly, but you can see how like
even through nominalism. I just don't think that. I think it's a mischaracterization of nominalism.
I guess maybe my point more that if you get the reformers who are reforming the Catholic Church, understandably, and you get the and then you have like the reformers of the reformers. I think that there is a direct causal chain between the improprieties of the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages to the reformers to the evangelicals that we have now. Now, blaming them directly because of their teachings might be a bit strong, but I think that there is a causal chain there. If
A
that
causal
makes sense.
chain through because of the breakdown of authority structures. I think that is much more fair than trying to blame the teachings. Although,
Well, right,
the
specifically
allowance,
like
the breakdown of the
Luther
authority
said one
structures
weird thing,
allows
therefore
for
trannies.
non-reformed teachings, right? And so it's like the reformers' teachings I don't think have a direct lineage leading to transgenderism, but the breakdown of the authority structures allows for these fringe groups to get in and become more and more less and less fringe, and
Mhm.
they eventually, those teachings do lead directly to you know,
No, I think
postmodernism.
that is more palatable for everyone, that statement, but yeah.
I wish I could remember the title of Dr. Jordan Cooper's video on this modernity being Lutheran.
I watched
It was
his
really good.
nominalism video on it today, actually.
Oh, good.
For the topic.
The 7-minute one or the longer one? 'Cause I think he has a longer
Just
one.
it was a response during a live stream. I think it was like an 8-minute clip.
Okay.
I don't think I
So
saw
if
that.
you have
I
the
watched
longer
the-
video on it, I haven't watched it.
I watched the Javier Perdomo Scholastic Lutherans video. I wish I had known this was coming, so I could watch so much more. Because like I watched this stuff years ago, and then it's like faded out of my mind. And then there's this clip, and I'm like, I know Luther's not a nominalist, but I don't remember the details.
My issue is that I just feel like so much of this is a mischaracterization, and I'm not an expert in scholastic theology. I'm certainly not an expert on nominalism, so just forgive me if I'm saying things out of turn. But I do think that it would be wrong to describe Aristotle as a nominalist, but largely because that would be anachronistic. Although I do think that a lot of the Aristotelian Platonic distinction can be also mapped onto much of what the nominalists were trying to do. There is some overlap there. Now, that's a gross oversimplification, but I think that so the point is, like I was going back to the very beginning of this episode, philosophy is, we're all trying to ask and answer the same questions, and I think nominalism is just a slightly different approach to trying to answer the same questions that Plato and Aristotle were wrestling with. And to simply describe it as a rejection of the reality of universals is not a fair characterization. It would be more correct to sort of describe it as a dispersal of the reality of these universals across the individuals. And then you have to sort of explain how abstractions happen. How do you see two rocks and call them both rocks if there is not a world of the forms where you can, where their similarity is actually in relation to this rockness, whereas the nominalist would be much closer to saying, well, it's you can see that they're both rocks because of their relation to each other, not their relation to this third thing, this idea of rock. And that's a lot closer to what Aristotle was trying to say as well. And so, I'm sure that there are all kinds of distinctions between the way the nominalists went about answering these questions from what Aristotle would have said, largely because the nominalists were reacting to scholastic theology, which was largely pulling from Aristotle. So I'm sure that there are plenty of distinctions, but they're all trying to answer the same questions. And just because they're arriving at slightly different answers, their answers are much, much more complicated than these gross simplifications.
Scientific revolution, supposedly, this is how we get to there's no male and female. So you can see kind of the logical train here. If things don't have essences, well, then they don't actually have genders, right? Objectively, because everything is just a name. So I can just name myself he, him, zer, z, it, right? I'm not trying to go too fast or too far in the sense of like theology, but I'm saying there is an ideological sort of progression that you can get from nominalism to where we are now with postmodernism, and then with essentially,
It's interesting that an adult could.
So, I mean, realistically, can atheists even have sort of a universal claim like this, or wouldn't they kind of all fall into a nominalism type
Probably.
place, right?
Yeah, atheism has a really hard time answering how we abstract.
Yeah.
They have a really hard time answering how abstraction even happens. Which is, so like, I'm a huge fan of induction, which is essentially just another word for abstraction, right? We see these individuals and we abstract from them, and so we induce certain deeper truths from our experiences. But I can say that happens because of the instincts that God has planted in us, and the fact that that there is a God gives us knowledge of, or at least faith in the order of the universe, and so we can now start to do these abstractions. But yeah, atheists or pure materialists don't have a good answer for how abstractions happen. There are some Platonic atheists, but again, that's weird. How do you hold to this world of the forms if you're an atheist, ergo probably a materialist? And there are atheists that will say that well, you don't have to be a materialist to be an atheist, which is an odd statement. It's hard to see how that happens unless you're talking about some kind of panpsychism, where you're saying that it's not that everything is matter, but instead everything is consciousness, which is actually a very interesting idea. And I think that it's becoming more and more popular. And I think, again, if you map it on, if you pull sort of the Christian side of it, there's a sense in which mind precedes matter. And that's what we see in creation. God is sort of the ultimate spirit. So he's immaterial. And so he's like pure mind in a sense. And so it's funny to see these atheists start to posit these ideas that actually sound a lot like what Christians have known all along. But panpsychism is essentially trying to solve the mind-body problem, or the brain-mind problem of how do you have something that is purely material, the brain, but then you have this mind inside it. How do you get this mind? And there has never been, it's called the hard problem of consciousness. How do you connect those two? And it always requires a leap. And there are some people that are very optimistic that if we just study it enough, we'll finally get it. But philosophy is pretty convincingly shown that that's just not possible. There's no way to make the leap from mind to matter. And so that's where panpsychism comes in and says, well, maybe everything is mind. Everything is actually consciousness, and matter is actually just sort of a form of consciousness even. So like even rocks have sort of some form, they're made of consciousness. Consciousness is actually the base unit, the base, atom structure. Anyways, so you'll get these sort of weird ideas of how you can try to solve the materialist paradigm that atheists get themselves into, but even that just creates all kinds of new problems as well. How do you get matter? If everything is consciousness, where does the leap go to? How do you leap from that to the matter that we clearly interact with? And so it is very, very difficult for atheists to solve these problems. And most of them just kind of throw their hands up in the air and say, yeah, we'll, maybe eventually we'll figure it out if we just keep studying. We just keep doing our science right. We'll get it.
Science maxers.
Yeah.
Was there another clip in this, or did you want to keep going down this pipeline?
There was one more clip. Jump ahead to, let me find it. Go to, so where are we right now? What's the timestamp at this
2038,
moment?
sir.
2038. Jump to 107:30.
While he's looking for that, I don't actually have a problem with nominalism being the fault of, or the cause of transgenderism, as Jay was saying. I actually kind of agree. I just don't think, I think Protestantism's like a kind of like a side split, right? So you got nominalism going this way, and you get some Protestant influence. It influences Protestant over here, and it keeps going this direction, and it's that main branch of nominalism that gets you transgenderism. Given that most of our scholars ended up rejecting it in favor of some form of realism or Platonism, it's hard to be like, these guys are nominalists, and that's how you get transgender. It's like, okay, buddy. And then all the sexual revolution philosophers, they're all from France anyway, which is Catholic. So,
well, kind of. I mean, the French Revolution was like proto-communism almost, right?
Yeah,
and very atheistic as well.
Yeah, it was just horrible.
Well, and to be fair, a lot of the bad existential postmodern ideas did come out of Germany, which is Luther's town. So
well, Germany does weird things with every sect that goes in there. Okay, exactly. you got the German Catholics always being weird with their Star Wars mass, and funny
Didn't
people.
They do a hip hop mass recently?
Yes,
I've seen many strange Catholic masses. I mean, there was the one where they had recently people were memeing on. There was, I think it was in Africa somewhere, and it was they had like the altar boys like dancing, like twerking with the incense, and it was like, nice.
Man, the new man, the versus the individual man. You've got capitalistic sort of self gratification on one side, and then over here you've got this idea that you are a property of the state. Both of these are dialectical opposites, right? And usually the way dialectics work in terms of big term strategy is to synthesize these. So I was also studying Hegel and Hegelian dialectics in college, and how that's and he does say that there's thesis, antithesis, synthesis. There's a good academic research which I think demonstrates that Hegel was also influenced by Kabbalistic ideas. So you have the two pillars of mercy and severity, and then you have the synthesis of those two extremes that can be a way of managing and controlling. And people have got this down to a science. It's not just my speculation. You can read.
To pause it. So I don't have tons to say here. People called Jay out for this comment about Hegel, and I just think this is funny as a philosophy buff, because it's clear that Jay hadn't heard this concept before, what I'm about to say, but in the end Jay ends up being basically correct. So in Hegelian circles, there's this idea that the people after Hegel are the ones who came up with the terminology of synthesis or thesis, antithesis, synthesis, and ran with it. But Hegel never actually uses those words, as far as I know, or if he does, it's not in that quite that way. So this triadic structure is something that's now being like superimposed onto Hegel. But the thing is, Hegel did absolutely have a triadic structure. It just functioned in a slightly less mechanistic way than a lot of the people that came after Hegel used it. And so the critique of, so whenever someone talks about Hegel and mentions thesis, antithesis, synthesis, a Hegelian will jump in and say, well, that's not what Hegel taught. He taught, I forget the exact terms that he used, but it's basically like the idea, the opposite of, the natural opposite of that idea, and then some new idea that springs organically from those ideas. Now, that is different than the way that like Marxists would have used the concept of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. That would have been a very kind of mechanistic way of, you take this thing, you take its opposite, and then you join them, sort of like a merger of the two ideas, and you pull ideas from both in sort of almost like 50-50. Whereas for Hegel, it was much more organic. So the new idea, that third thing, could actually incorporate elements that weren't present in either of the first two. They could actually be the thing, and the opposite of it actually revealed some flaws in the thing itself, and so actually you have to pull in some new elements, and so you get this organic growth from this dialectic. But that is like the only distinction between the sort of post-Hegelian triadic and the Hegelian triadic, is that the post-Hegelian, the way it gets used by Marxists and by a lot of people, I mean, everyone is using Hegel, and especially in Germany, there's so many Hegelophiles or Hegelian files. So, and the way they use it is very often very mechanical and very they will try to join them and smash these ideas together in a way that perhaps Hegel wouldn't have been as familiar with, and Hegel's would have been much more organic. But ultimately, it's not really that different. And the thing is, no one really cares about Hegel. The only reason people study Hegel is because of the philosophical children that he bore. Metaphorically speaking, it's Marx, it's all these people after Hegel that were using his dialectic, which is funny because even the dialectic is it's an old Jewish concept. It's an old, the scholastics would use dialectic, so it's like even this you can map the whole thesis, antithesis, synthesis framework onto a lot of scholasticism. A lot of what Thomas Aquinas was doing is similar to that. So I don't even know why people care so much about Hegel specifically, except for the fact that people like Marx would directly have attributed their ideas to this triadic structure. So I'll share this post. Let's see, add to stage. Oh, I got to remove yours first. Remove, add. So this is Jay responding. Let's see. They said, no, I only have his reply. But basically,
Spurgatron 5000.
it's a great name. But yeah, the guy basically is attacking him for misusing, misrepresenting Hegel, and then Jay's characterization of what he says is, well, it's not thesis, antithesis, synthesis. It's position, opposite, and reconciliation. In other words, thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And I'm kind of with Jay on this one. I think that this is something that Hegelian nerds will kind of go, actually, but it's really a moot distinction. It's not. It makes you sound smart when you can say, well, no one actually understands what Hegel. They're actually just talking about later interpreters of Hegel. But I don't really have a problem with the later interpreters. I think that it's close enough if you just understand that it's maybe a little bit more organic and isn't supposed to be a purely mechanical process. But even even Marx's ideas aren't purely mechanical. I mean, you can't get. So what is he saying? He's saying serfdom and capitalism ultimately they merge to create socialism, and then socialism and something merge to create communism. I forget exactly how he does it, but even he is doing so he's really just forcing the method to fit his end goals. Even he's not following some like mathematical process to get to the conclusion. So yeah, so I'm kind of with Jay on this one. I think that using thesis, antithesis, synthesis is a perfectly fine way of characterizing the Hegelian dialectic or triadic, and just know that it is, in theory, supposed to be a little bit more organic than mechanical. That's really all you need to know. All right, I just brought that up because I'm a philosophy nerd, and I thought that was a funny little debate, and a lot of people were getting mad at Jay for making that huge mistake, and he's supposed to be a grad philosophy student. It's like, I mean, it would be nice if he was a little bit more familiar with this debate within Hegelianism, but it doesn't really matter. All right. So
the only thing that comes to my mind with Hegelianism is this really funny article written by a woman whose husband was a Hegelian, and he just got so locked into the philosophy that she would be talking about physics, and he would be like, no, that physics can't work because of Hegelianism. And it's just ruining their marriage.
It's bad. Yeah, I've heard that trying to read Hegel is like putting your balls in a blender. It's just not fun.
Yeah, I'm gonna try and avoid that.
A lot of those German philosophers were very much like that. They would write very long books that said so little. All right. Final topic that we have for the day, and we're pretty much wrapping up here, is just the PC USA has done some more shenanigans.
Redeemed Zoomer most affected.
Yeah.
I love him. He's so funny. I love him, but it's like, brother, I think there can be a time to reconquista. And there can be a time to build a new institution. And brother, I'm sorry, it's time to build a new PC USA.
Well, he's trying to have a really weird, magisterial Protestant scheme, I guess, where there can only be the 7 mainline Protestant sects, and then they get rid of everyone else, right? It's only the people who are kicked out of a church can start their own denomination, I think. Which even that is weird, because couldn't then I just protest enough to get kicked out of my church and then start my denomination in that worldview?
It doesn't make any sense. I like him. He seems like a genuinely good dude. But he's so committed
weird from
to the
Protestant to be like, no, you can't leave the church. Yeah. Well, okay, fair enough, I suppose.
I love Richard. I'm a Richard stan.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so we're just going to play a couple minutes of this. There was one part in particular that was interesting and more than what we talked about before. So, I mean, the context is the PC USA, they had this vote at their General Assembly. Which
I
is
have the article
highest.
pulled up as well in mine.
Okay, it's the highest body that makes decisions within Presbyterian organizations. Like the General Assembly is the highest body, and they had this vote on basically affirming trans kid surgeries, stuff like that. It's not. I mean, it has been a position that they have held basically officially for a while now. So there's really nothing new here. They just sort of instantiated it. It doesn't have any binding effect, is what apparently is what Redeemed Zoomer says. Because it has to be like fully adopted by everyone before it would actually be binding. But what I thought was interesting is Redeemed Zoomer goes into basically his analysis of the congregation. His understanding is that it is majority conservative, but then you have the leadership structure is heavily weighted towards the liberals. And he has a very interesting diagram to illustrate how this comes about and what that structure looks like. So that's what I wanted to share, because I thought that was new information that we hadn't really ever talked about before when we've covered the Redeemed Zoomer and the PC USA shenanigans. So
that is still quite a landslide majority. So you can't blame people for thinking that 94% of the PC USA is this liberal, but it's not. It's not at all. So here is basically how the PC USA works. Even though the PC USA is largely a liberal denomination because conservatives keep splitting off, if you look at the laity, the actual members of the PC USA, they are still majority conservative. 55% of the PC USA voted for Trump. Now, I'm not a Trump fan myself, but even when polled on like conservative versus liberal without regard to politics, more PC USA members identify as conservative than liberal, even just on general cultural issues like same-sex marriage, abortion, things like that. So the laity of the PCUSA, statistically, according to Ryan Burge, are more conservative than Roman Catholic laity. But the way the PCUSA works is as you go up the ladder, it gets more and more radically progressive. The laity send representatives to presbyteries, but for whatever reason, only the most liberal people decide to show up to presbytery. And the presbyteries, the regional governing bodies, send representatives to the General Assembly, but for whatever reason, only the most liberal members of presbytery decide to go to the General Assembly. So the laity is majority conservative and moderate. The pastors are honestly a mixed bag. There's like 20% of the pastors I'd say are conservative. The presbyteries are usually either moderate, liberal, or ultra progressive. And the General Assembly is just the most radical progressive of the most radical progressive groups. Now, many of you who are more conservative, I'm assuming the majority of my audience is more conservative, might be wondering, well, why is this? Why are the progressives the ones who get involved? Why don't the conservatives get involved? Well, think about your reaction to the headline. I'm assuming most of you had the reaction to the headline like, how can anyone stay in the church after this? This is horrible. I got to leave. Well, that is the conservative psychology that I'm trying to change. The conservative psychology.
This is the reason why I play Redeemed Zoomer, is because he gets to draw a little bit of the hate.
Yeah, that's right.
Otherwise, Cody normally be calling me gay. So.
Is to disengage when an institution does something they don't like. And the progressive psychology is to get more involved when an institution does something they don't like. Like the progressives were the minorities in the denomination for a really long time. The denomination was against them for a really long time. The denomination was against same-sex marriage. But they kept persisting and persisting and persisting until things changed. So conservatives often make fun of progressives for being like liberal snowflakes, but progressives have much more of a spine than conservatives when it comes to church politics. Progressives keep pushing at it until they get their way, whereas conservatives just split off when they don't get their way. So yeah, that mindset doesn't just apply to people who have split off, but also people who remain in the denomination. There are many conservatives that remain in the PCUSA, but they don't get involved. Like churches that are part of the fellowship community, for example, which is a network of conservative PCUSA churches. They don't really bother getting involved in church politics. They're done with that. They're fatigued from that. They just want to do ministry in their own local context. And that's admirable. But I started the nonprofit to try and do more advocacy because somebody needs to do it. And people are starting to notice that. And there's going to be a video in a couple weeks that comes out about what Presbyterians for the Kingdom did at General Assembly. My organization made a very big splash at General Assembly. You're going to hear all about it soon. We just have to make sure we get enough footage and get all the details together. Anyway, yeah, this is how the PCUSA works. But this is how the PCUSA could work if people got more involved. If the General Assembly was actually representative of the laity, this vote would not have happened at all. But sadly, the vote did happen. So what does this mean?
Right. So you get it. I mean, if all the conservatives in the congregation actually applied themselves and actually participated in the higher levels of the organization, then you would have a much more even split and even a majority of conservatives attending the General Assembly and the higher echelons of the hierarchy. So, it's I thought that was somewhat elucidating. Maybe
Yeah.
maybe they
Well,
can turn it around.
the actual numbers at the top, yeah, 441 to 30. Not close. You know, pretty disgusting when you think about it. Now,
Yeah.
according to Redeem Zoomer's own ecclesiology, all he actually has to do is get enough ultra progressives at the top to where they kick him and the rest of the conservatives out, and then he can start his own movement. So either way this goes, whether he gets the Reconquista, which may never happen, probably won't happen, or he gets kicked out, either way, like he'll be
wins.
part of a better denomination at some point.
So, Godspeed, my friend. Godspeed.
He's just so funny. This sounds mean. I don't take him very seriously all that often. There are times where I do. There are times where I don't. He's just funny. He's
I mean, he's a Minecraft YouTuber who's trying to do something that he believes in. So good for him, you know.
Yeah,
That's right.
I believe in you, Richard. Keep going. Keep doing it, buddy. My big problem with this video, at least the clip that we watched, his metric for measuring conservative doesn't work. Because
Trump?
like, yeah,
Or-
well, but even other like, oh, they're kind of sort of socially conservative on like these two things, gay
Right.
marriage and abortion.
Right.
I know a ton of people that are really conservative on stuff like that, but they're still like super liberal theologically. Like they just kind of either don't care that much about theology and just believe whatever.
Yeah.
Or so it's like this is not a
Right.
good measure.
Political
Right.
conservatism does not map perfectly onto theological
Well,
legitimacy.
and even some of the ones that he mentioned, which map on a little stronger, like traditional marriage, like pro-life, it's still not a guarantee of theological conservatism.
Yeah.
Because again, there are still people that like are theological progressives in some ways.
What one would almost think that a better indicator of whether or not you were theologically conservative is whether or not you're attending a PCUSA church. In which case, 100% down the drain. So, I mean, I know that there are a couple of good congregations, but I think that's probably a much more accurate representation of the laity is the number of congregations that are actively opposed to these things in whole, right? If you've got someone who is conservative attending one of these extremely liberal churches, I don't think that they are Christian, conservative in that sense. I don't think that they are going to be, opposed to the liberal theology. So, just my guess. John, you had the article pulled up. Is there anything else from the article you wanted to cover?
It just goes into the details about them being affirming, puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, a bunch of other, like it's basically like, yeah, we approve of trans children at the PCUSA, which is like, all right, I think you're a denomination of the devil, not of Christ anymore, So it's just all the normal like ultra progressive liberal stuff, right? I mean, to call them a Christian denomination seems like an affront to Christians. Obviously, like colloquially, they affirm some things about Christ, but if you get into their Christology, they're probably more Gnostic or maybe even more like Muslims in the fact that they probably don't believe that Jesus is actually divine in the same way, right?
Yeah.
We kind of brought that up earlier. Like that it's just weird to be associated with them in any way, shape, or form, right? It seems strange. I'm pretty sure the church fathers wrote a lot about separating from heretics.
Well, the apostles did too. Yeah. It's
So the apostles' threshold for throwing somebody out of the church would have been much lower than, you can cut your kid's dick off. Fine, bro.
Yeah. And I mean, we are called even to separate from the brothers, people who call themselves brothers, who don't act like it. Those are the people that we are most called to separate from. It's not the pagans or the people that are of the world. Those, if we separated from them, then we wouldn't be able to evangelize. But it's the people that call themselves Christians that don't act like it. Those are the people that we need to shun. And
well, I think the delineation is that somebody is like wrong in a mental proposition is like, okay, that's still a problem. But somebody who knows the truth and actively perverts it, right? It's a different standard. Like a pagan is just wrong. Somebody who's a Muslim is just wrong. Somebody who is a Mormon, right? They're just wrong. They've just been led astray. But somebody who it professes to be a Christian, to believe the same as you do, but pervert everything about it, right? Which I think is why schism is technically worse than heresy, because schism is a violation of love, and heresy is just a violation of like belief. Like you just have a wrong belief, right?
Yeah, I know I've heard Redeem Zoomer say that. I don't know sort of if other people have said that, but it makes sense. Yeah, I think that's a characterization I would sign on to. All right, well that is it for the official schedule here. We do have a rather sad announcement. So John, a couple weeks ago, John told us that he'd probably have to be stepping down because, well, I mean, I'm kind of shocked you lasted this long, John, considering you're streaming 3 days a week with your other show. So we really appreciate you getting us off the ground here, and yeah, it's been a joy to have you on the show. Is this going to be your last show?
This is the last one, the last regular show. Now, that's not to say that I'll ever never come back, but
good.
And it wasn't, to be clear, okay, no drama here. There was a brutal, bloody fight about payment, about custody. Like there was a whole thing, yelling match. That's why we were late today.
That's right.
But no, it's
true. I was behind the scenes.
It's just a pure mechanical problem. Okay, I don't have enough time in the week to run my own show, and more importantly, to spend time with my own kids. I do have 3 kids, and 4 nights a week being away from them is a bit much. So I do unfortunately have to not attend this show regularly to help with my own time schedule. I cannot create an extra day in the week, unfortunately. So, I mean, I really appreciate the show. Shep, Christian, and James for hanging out for what, a year?
Yeah.
Basically a year
or something.
which has been a great time. I've learned a lot. I've grown a lot. I've appreciated all of the conversations and even the disagreements that we've had. So I really appreciate all of that. And I'll probably come back for like special episodes, but I just can't dedicate an entire day of the week on top of all of my other things where I'm, gone for, 1 to 2 days a week shooting and then 3 days streaming plus this show and other things. And I gotta spend more time with the family and more time on my own business ventures. So I really appreciate the time for all of you. And again, I will always cherish the memories here. So thank you guys.
Absolutely.
To continue the bad news, I'm taking over his spot.
Yeah, spoiler alert.
The 1-2 whammy.
I know, boom.
Bro, jeez.
That is the
next part.
It's time to end.
Shep is our third chair right now. So we're happy to have you stepping in, and yeah, looking forward to that as well. But real quick, John, I just really want to give you a shout out for all the work that you put in. I mean, I put together the show maps for a lot of this, but John was always creating the thumbnails, putting together the stream. We used his StreamYard for the entire time up to this. This is the first one that I've done on my StreamYard account. So, I mean, there's just so many things that John did behind the scenes that we couldn't have done this without him. So, John, thank you so much. It's just been a delight and such a blessing for me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it, man. Same back at you, bro.
There you go. Christian's here for now. Christian, I know you're busy with school stuff.
Everyone's favorite Stoic.
That's right. We're glad to have you. We still have
so
some
like
Orthodox representation.
More so like everyone's just favorite tired boy, man. I'm just always sleepy.
Bro, for real. This is a fun show to do, but it's like weeknights are so hard for me because I'm up at 5 a.m. every morning to hit the gym before work.
Ouch, bro. That is rough.
I hate Scamazon.
No.
Unsub. That's not nice. Guys, come on.
It's my fault.
I will put out just a PSA. We are looking for a Catholic panelist. So if you know someone or if you are Catholic and watching this and would be interested, I would be interested in talking to you.
What would be a really funny tradition of the show is every host that you bring on eventually just converts to Orthodoxy. you keep cycling through Catholic co-hosts, just keep leaving.
Only the Catholic ones, though.
Yeah.
I love my Ortho bros. I love my Ortho fellas, but
we're glad to have. the goal is to have representation all across, and so that
Yeah.
again, we
So
do
we're
want
gonna
a
get
Catholic
some
on.
ELCA and some
No,
PCUS.
no.
Some pagans. Yeah,
Christian
you gotta
Some
have a
pagans and some
holistic framework
Muslims.
here. We need
Oh, God.
pagans, we need Mormons, we need Muslims. Okay, this is gonna be like dude, what was the translation that was done by like all the different religions? Was that NIV? Was that the one?
That I don't know. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, there was one where they had like Muslims and rabbis consulting on the translation. It's like I don't know.
That might have been NIV 2011. I heard the 2020 is better. I've spoken with one of the translators for the NIV committee.
NIV was really rough
Craig
for a little
Blomberg.
bit there.
Blomberg's a cool dude.
Okay.
Mm.
The 1984 NIV is solid. The one they came out with after that was not so good. I think they started to really do some more gender neutral language, which actually
Right,
started
yeah,
to-
that was the one. That I think that was the one that had like rabbis and Muslims on the panel, which is like
yeah.
what benefit would that be? It's like having a pagan interpret the Bible for you. Well, you see, Jesus' real name was Odin.
I mean, if the only source for like finding an obscure Hebrew word is like a Jewish scholar,
Maybe.
fair, but that's in consulting them, that's fine. Adding them to your committee,
Mhm.
I'm partial to the NASB 97. No, not 97. 78. That's what it is. The
Just
NASB
get
78.
physical media. Buy yourself an ESV Bible that was published before 2000s or an NIV, whatever you prefer. But get an actual physical copy because you do not know where these things will go. Like the Bible apps, they all have the newer versions, and you just can't trust them. Like I'll look up a verse in my ESV Bible app, and it's like this isn't the verse that I recognize. I mean, it's not horribly different usually, but it just still throws me off on the verbiage. So physical media is the way to go. Same with video games and movies and all of that. You buy something on Amazon, if you look at the actual terms, this is totally off topic, but if you look at the actual terms, they can just remove it from you. They can remove it from your library. If their licensing agreement changes, you don't actually own that piece of media. They can just take it out of your library even though you bought it. So it's really just an extended lease. So anyways, physical media, same applies to Bibles and books of all types. All right, the references that we talked about are in the description already. If you wanted to look at the Ryan Reeves Occam video, William of Occam's, or the Audible link to Problems of Philosophy, or the Peter Kraft series, or even the Ron Nash History of Philosophy class, I recommend all of those, and the links are in the description. All right, Christian, John, Shep, thank you so much. Good night. God bless.
Have a blessed
The
evening.
hell was that? A
God
bass?
bless, Vince.
No, I hit the spring on my microphone.